Welcome back to another episode of Brass Tack Bodybuilding. Today I'm joined by, yet again, Mr. Phil Viz himself, because you guys are always asking for Phil. The last episode we did got a lot of good feedback. You guys followed through. You liked the video. You ran the comments up. So here we are. Phil's back. But alongside Phil this time, we also have Kyle Wilkes. So this is going to be a great episode, guys. I think you guys are really going to like it. And we did also discuss potentially making this a regular thing, having both Phil and Kyle on, doing these educational type of episodes, which all my episodes are really mostly educational. That's the whole point of this podcast. But if that's something you guys do want to see, again, make sure you like this video, run the likes up, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I do appreciate it. And make sure you drop some comments down below. If that's something you want to see, let me know. Give me some feedback on this episode, what you guys think. It's going to help. And if you guys want to see it, that's what we need. We need the feedback to see what you guys really want. But before we move on, as always, if you order anything from HD Muscle, always make sure you use code SEB at checkout to get 10% off any order. Why spend more when you could spend less with code SEB? Now, we did also just drop a new product called Pro HD Clear. It's like a refreshing, kind of watery, clear type of protein. It's pretty self-explanatory compared to your standard milky, chocolate, vanilla whey. It's really good. I really like it. I've been having it a lot. There's two flavors. We got raspberry and mango. I think I like raspberry a bit more, but they're both phenomenal at the end of the day. Taste is all preference. So check them out, guys. If you do like it, you decide to try it out, let me know. Drop a comment. Let me know on Instagram. Shoot me a DM. Tag me in your stories. Hope you guys like it. And yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into it. What we're going to talk about today is really the post-show phase, rebounding, all that stuff. Kyle, you just had two guys compete, the Trent twins, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about what they're doing right now in that phase?
They're reverse?
Yeah, are they even doing a reverse? Or I just saw him post something about going back to powerlifting. So are they even like approaching it from any bodybuilding perspective?
Depends who's listening to this video to clip it and make more videos. They have a reverse. I'd say they're having a difficult time like most kids do. I don't know about you, but I know my first reverse prior to when I worked with Phil, even the first time with Phil, I struggled a little bit. It's just, you introduce those foods that you were craving and it's hard to kind of get a grip on it. So it's not surprising, and knowing their background, they do like to lift heavy. So it's kind of hard for them to have a governor on them going like back fully where they were before I kind of got my hands on them,
Uh-huh. Yeah, you were a lot better at it than I was, though. I think my first one, I might have gained 30 pounds that week. So I was like really but there was no coaches back then. There wasn't a lot of help back then. There wasn't a lot of information back then. I'm just thinking I'm getting big and strong and, the weights are flying up and, I'm not realizing why the weight's flying up. I just know that I'm getting stronger and I feel like I'm getting bigger. There's a lot of water in the muscles, not really any regard for blood pressure. Kyle, actually, you don't give yourself enough credit. You were pretty controlled. You were pretty good. You were, as far as executing what you needed to, you were very, very good at it. So, I would give yourself a little bit more credit than that. I know you're joking around a little bit, but a lot better than people that I typically will encounter when they're in the early 20s.
No.
How long did you guys work together? When did you start coaching again?
Phil? So I went to Phil. He's pretty much my only coach really in bodybuilding. I started with someone, did one show, got beat by a fellow named Mike Charles. And he looked awesome. And it just so happened that this guy, Philip Vizzacaro, coached him. So I just shot a message on Instagram at the time. It might have been Facebook. I think it was Instagram, to be honest. And Phil answered. He said, "Hey, these are, my rates." He didn't ask me to write an essay or anything, but I'm always very wordy when it comes to things. So I'm eloquent with the choice of words I use. And I just expressed hey, I really care about this. I feel like I could have been better. And I have a passion for this. You're kind of local. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to, see this through and see what I can make of it. And then Phil, I think right away, I was one of those people that I pay for a year up front because I want to invest. And anyway, that knows me knows I'm frugal when it comes to money. So if I gave Phil $100, I'm going to see it through, right? Because I don't want to just waste money. I'd rather donate it to charity or something like that. And then, so we worked together for pretty much most of my career, to be honest. I only competed for about 6 years thus far. So about the first 4 years.
Yeah, Kyle was actually I don't remember exactly what he wrote, but I remember thinking that he must have a professional job because he was very well written and smart, and I felt like he, conveyed the right things as far as somebody who's successful. You can tell when somebody's kind of like, I want to do this, and like kind of like they're just looking for the spotlight and they want the easy way out. And I kind of remember thinking like, this kid's going to do whatever needs to be done. And then, a little bit further down the road, I started noticing like he's pretty goddamn smart. Anything that I've ever said to him, he could regurgitate verbatim and understand it. And I was like, that's actually pretty rare. That's kind of what gave me the idea. I'm like, you know what, you should start coaching. I don't even think he ever thought of it, but I was like, you're pretty goddamn smart. Like I can tell intelligent individuals right away. And like Kyle and Nelson, like they really stood out to me as far as like being able to not just memorize and regurgitate what I say, but express understanding of it. There's it's very, very different to be able to regurgitate what people say. We get that a lot online with influencers and people that try to act smart and naive. I've said many times, most of the podcasts you guys are watching, they Googled all that stuff right before the podcast and really studied and crammed for it. Like they learned that stuff 20 minutes ago, and it was very, very clear and apparent that, Nelson and Kyle could like take that information and apply it. And I'm like, well, you guys should probably, put this to good use because there's not a lot of intelligent coaches out there that are good at this. And I guess I was right.
So you said he was in his early 20s. I feel like, Kyle, you're probably younger than I think you are. I thought you were like close to 40. Are you not that old?
God damn.
How old are you?
That's
What the fuck?
Crazy. 30.
I thought you were around the same age as Phil.
No. Maybe. So yeah, I'm 32.
Wow.
Not 40 or 42 or whatever you had in your mind. Okay.
Kyle was always very smart for his age. Like when I was like, if you were to compare my age relative to his age, he was a lot smarter than I was at those ages. He just seemed to like mentally mature quicker. And like if you talk to him, even in his early 20s, he would come off like he was, master's degree in his 30s. Like I can't tell you how many times he rewrote something for me. Like I was going to post something. He's like, no. And then just rewrote it all. And, it was the information that I wanted, but I didn't write it like he did because he just knew how to, like, he's just very good at it, So he always comes off as older and more mature. I guess you could say wise.
Okay. Yeah. That's crazy. Okay. So you, in the past, you both have struggled obviously with the post-show phase. So I guess why don't we go off of some things to just keep in mind? Like what are some things that you, for the average competitor, first-time competitor, or just in general, what are you looking out for in that post-show phase? Things to avoid, things that you want to take note of, or what you're trying to really accomplish just in general?
Yeah. So I think, to start, I think the process, the reverse is like utmost important, right? So I don't think anyone I talk to, mentor, or even other coaches I try to speak with and hear their perspective, like the ultimate goal is like, you don't want clients to view it as optional, the reverse, right? It's basically a process that allows for a number of psychological improvements, another cutting phase in the future if needed, and then free meals to be implemented, right? So I always tell people, anytime they work with me, let's just say the show is, USA, July 27th. Always plan for at least 4 weeks after that to be in prep, because coming out of a show, as you both know, you've been in shows, it's like the hardest part, especially once you get the little bit of food or, a free meal. It's super hard to kind of pull on the reins, especially at a younger age, because you don't really have the willpower. And depending on how you placed and stuff like that, it's really challenging, right? So I think, the 6 to 8 weeks after a cutting phase or, a contest, for example, I look at the next 6 months as like the rebound phase in terms of how can you set those 6 to 8 weeks are going to dictate how successful the next 6 months are. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
So then, like, I think ultimately from my experience, a lot of people wind up going off the rails and they throw everything out of whack. So, instead of being able to make legitimate improvements if they're motivated to do so, now they're stuck fixing a lot of metabolic and hormonal issues. And, the goal during that reverse, you want to balance, obviously not gaining too much fat in the process and trying to get to that maintenance as quick as possible. But I think, again, people sometimes are just overzealous, or they start to become fixated on the scale, thinking that, hey, I can gain 20 pounds of muscle in 6 weeks. And the reality is, we both know 95% of the time, you're not gaining anything like that, no matter what you're doing, you know? So I always generally for my most of my competitors, I don't put free meals in for the first few weeks. And sometimes people are like, "Hey, this is like," often many clients of mine always say, "Hey, this is actually harder than the last few weeks. Like I'd rather be like 3 weeks out again." And I laugh, but the reality is it's kind of true, especially once you're in that phase. Um, so that's kind of how I preface things, right? In terms of, I guess, there's a lot of laundry list of things we can get into, right? But I think what I also try to talk about is like a lot of times clients after a cutting phase or a contest prep, they fall into a state of depression. They're tired, they don't have the lack of purpose because they were so goal oriented for X amount of weeks. So I express to them like, hey, this is 100% normal what you're going through or what you're going to go through. So setting them up so they're aware of what to expect, I think is super important. And then I think a lot of the times people have a very difficult time executing their reverse because, there's less than their productivity in the beginning during this phase isn't, as exciting, I guess, when, the last couple of weeks of a contest prep, you're shredded, you're posting pictures, you're seeing daily changes. Ultimately, especially if you're not on PEDs post show, if you are kind of slacking in terms of executing, you're only looking kind of worse. You might be fuller, but sure enough, you start to realize like, hey, damn, I was like, 230 when I was 3 weeks out, and I looked a lot better than this 230. Like something's going wrong here. So I think ultimately, again, for those 6 to 8 weeks, I try to have someone dialed in, and I let them know, like, if you really care about trying to become a professional in this, or you really want to take advantage of this, set yourself up for success. Like, just bite the bullet and really like double down these next 6 to 8 weeks, because then after that, life becomes much easier to balance out. Those moods and being tired all the time, all of that stuff kind of goes away. So does that kind of touch on kind of what you asked a little bit?
So what are you really trying to accomplish within that 6 to 8 weeks though? Like why can't you just go out of the show straight back up to your maintenance and start pushing growth? Like what's the difference between what you're doing and how is that changing the ultimate outcome long term?
So I think sometimes what people don't realize is like your hormones get very out of whack when you're in a significant caloric deficit. Sprinkle in those PEDs that aren't so friendly, right? So I try to make people realize that, if they don't have an idea about hormones balancing out, which is obviously going to affect their mood, I try to preface them to be aware of this situation. From there, ultimately we need to upregulate the metabolism by reversing. So that's the goal over these X amount of weeks, is to slowly increase someone's intake, get them to that maintenance. If they go right from a significant deficit to a maintenance, the reality is when you're prepping for a long time, you downregulate your metabolism. So your maintenance is no longer your true maintenance. If you go right back to it, you're going to know that scientifically you're gaining a lot more weight than you should be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately, during those 8 weeks, I'm trying to allow someone, though people don't know about the neurotransmitter side of things, I want those things to balance out, right? So brain chemicals such as serotonin, dopamine, they get severely depleted during that intense cutting phase or contest prep. However, if people are using during the process, at least clients I come across, and especially younger adults, they are super keen on using a ton of stimulants, sometimes too early. And then because of that, you have a lot of adrenal fatigue and issues like that take time. People don't realize. They think they could just take a supplement, or hey, if I just give my body a break for 2 weeks, everything's going to be fine. But the reality is, if you're in a hard deficit for 4 to 5 months, things aren't going to work that quickly. And the longer you do this, I kind of always tell people, I don't know if I had a conversation with Phil about this back in the day, but you only have like so many preps in you to where you can do things a certain way, to where, hey, when you dieted, let's just say you had a contest prep this year, we're competing in July, I have a shitty reverse, not much of an off season. I go right back into a prep for the first show next year. The reality is, as I continue to do this and I continue to age, my diet at 12 weeks out this time around is what I was at 6 weeks out last time. And eventually it becomes not sustainable at all. And you're almost working harder and against yourself. So, yeah, I mean, kind of touch on, I guess, your main
What
for the 40.
why is that though? Why would you as you age, why would it get harder in that given example?
Yeah, so I think ultimately when we are pushing different compounds, right, you're pushing yourself, you have more muscle, you're I guess depending on the level you're at, right? I presume if someone's competing year after year, they're getting better. Now, getting better, sometimes I feel like everyone at some point during their career starts to think, hey, maybe if I take a little bit more, I'll get better. And when you start to abuse drugs like that, you have repercussions that you don't necessarily realize, right? So aside from the mood, aside from being an asshole to be around and having to repair relationships because you just were just an asshole during your last 4 weeks of prep, now you have spent this short off season and you're just so. I guess when I have a lot of influencers that I coach, right, they care about predominantly being in shape year round. If some of them are only in shape because they're able to lock themselves in a box, take certain compounds to look a certain way, they're so eager to get back to that. So they're more like, hey, like, can I put Clem in again? Can we go back into a cutting phase? And the reality is like, no, right? And if they're going to, they might get away with it in the beginning, right? They might be able to maintain that 7% body fat. But at some point, if it's not a balanced diet and it's just so like extreme, whether the drugs are present or not, and you're just always in this deficit, your body starts to become like almost, it doesn't know any better, right? I always use the example if someone's on an island, your body is going to slow down and realize, okay, this motherfucker Sebastian doesn't feed me. I eat once a week here. I'm not going to kill myself. I'm just going to start to go burn really slowly. And anytime I get something, I'm going to hold on to it. So that's what I mean by if you don't give yourself time to recover, your hormones to balance out, you to actually mentally be truly ready and not just motivated to do it, but actually ready, you're going to have a hard time prepping. And like, that's what I
I
think.
think that's. I think that was a great point that he just made about younger people tending to get away with things because they're young and their health is very strong. And then as they get older, they think they're going to get away with the same things, and they think they could just go forever. And then, like you just said, they're going to find out the hard way that as you age, your body is not going to be as resilient, and you're carrying more muscle. Your metabolic rate is going to be different. All of these factors are going to be different. Without naming names, I know when we were first doing the apprenticeship program, one of my top guys had a problem with the fact that I was feeding him less in prep. And that was because he was not working the same job, wasn't on his feet all day, and he thought that he was going to be running the same program, and was unhappy that there wasn't enough as much food. And I had to explain, you're doing different things this year. You're carrying more muscle. You're a little bit older. It's not going to be the same prep, and things are not always going to be the same. So, like Kyle just said, you have to evolve with your thinking and your approach constantly. You can't just do the same thing year after year. And as you get older, you're less resilient. So, yeah, you're going to start paying a price if you don't adapt. And so, right to your point.
And I noticed sometimes I'll get a client that wants to come to me, they just want to prep, right? A lot of people just, hey, I want to prep, I'm ready. First time around, they probably were never in a significant deficit, we can hope. So again, the prep, sometimes people look back to the point Phil just made and they say, hey, I noticed last time I was 8 weeks out, I was eating this much food, right? And sometimes my answer is, I don't really give a fuck what you were eating, because last time around you were eating 4,000 calories in McDonald's all the time and you were at 15% body fat. This time you didn't take an off season, right? You had the shitty reverse, went on vacation, and now 12 weeks later you want to prep again. So yeah, the diet's a lot harder now because your body is not responding. When I made that initial, I guess as I get to learn clients, right, I start to realize, okay, if I take 25 grams of carbs or 10 grams of fat, I'm going to induce this change. I know, without even looking, I know what they should happen. All of a sudden, 2 weeks later, it didn't happen this time. So I made the change at 12 weeks out, made the change at 10 weeks out. This time, 8 weeks out, no change. Okay, so my first thought is, did they cheat? Like, everything good? If not, okay, cool. I double down. Now I crank it even more. No change. Now it's just like, well, what the fuck's going on? It's a person stressing out. Like, and metabolic adaptation is a thing to where your body recognizes, okay, I know what's happening here. So sometimes when I take someone in the off season, I take that initial change that I usually like a 16-week prep. Ideally, that's what I prefer. So from 17 weeks out to 16 weeks out, usually I'll feed up that last week, and then I have a hard pull. It could be anywhere from 400 to 700 calories, like right away. And usually that diet should, over the next 4 weeks, generate pretty good change, right? Now, obviously, there's other things potentially in the beginning of a prep. You could throw in some cutters, stuff like that, depending on what the person's composition is. But just from a nutrition standpoint, that initial change gives me an idea of how that person's going to respond. So for females, usually, I guess where they differ from males, males' bodies, I guess, are more resilient. So what I mean, they can cold turkey some things. thyroid kind of bounces back. Do that with the female, and it just doesn't work so well, at least from my experience, right? So with females, when I make a change, sometimes it's more of like, okay, you didn't lose weight this week, like just stick to it. Let's give it some time, and all of a sudden things just start clicking, right? So had I been premature and focused on, okay, scientifically they should have lost 2 pounds here, I would have made that change again, and furthering that hole I'm digging that they're eventually going to have to come out, and I need time. And sometimes in a contest prep, you run out of time, right? So I always try to consider that variable when I'm prepping with somebody. But I guess to come full circle, when I say you only have so many preps in you, where the preps are different, it's based on how you're treating your body, right? So if I went 21 years of life, or 40, whatever you think I am, and I never prepped before, my first prep, I can get away with a lot probably. Right? My body never experienced being in this deficit. Maybe I never used certain compounds, never did this much cardio. But once I introduce it to that, your body is super complex in terms of what it understands. And I think sometimes, like, we're learning more and more that our bodies are, not just a creature of habit, but it's susceptible to a lot, right? Or, something goes catastrophic, we're impacted somehow, whether it's because psychologically or subconsciously we're thinking about it. These things really play a role. So I think that's the main thing that sometimes people miss, and they're just so focused on running the gauntlet, doing every single national show, Universe, USA's, North Americans, nationals at the end of the year, taking a 3-month break, doing it all again. They're never going to make much improvements. The preps
I call those spotlight chasers.
What's that?
I call those spotlight chasers. They don't actually want to improve. They don't actually want to win. They want to be able to write online all day that they're competing and they're doing shows, and they want everybody to ask them about their show every time they walk into the gym. But aside from that, I just wanted to pause here real quick and point out something very, very, very intelligent that Kyle just said to clarify for the viewers, is the fact that he made it very clear that he takes each prep individually and adapts on their individual response. He's not making assumptions. And I find that the vast majority of coaches make assumptions on what the body is about to do, and they react based off of that. Like Kyle said, and he said, if you start doing that, you're going to go south. It's not going to work. So it was a very, very good point. So I wanted to make sure everybody really focused on this, is the fact that he reacts to each person and each prep individually. No assumptions, no this worked last time. It's no, let's see what happens and do what the body tells us. So I just wanted to point that out.
No, I'm sure that every prep is different across the board for every person. I'm sure the next prep that we do will be vastly different from the prep that. Yeah, I'm sure the prep we did last time is not going to be remotely the same to the next prep that we do.
How many times have you seen a coach program T3 right at the beginning of a prep? Now, What is T3? T3 is synthetic thyroid. What do we typically use it for? We use it to replace the metabolism that's slowed down as we were going through prep. Well, guess what? First 2 weeks, your metabolism didn't slow down. Why are you putting it in there? And then sometimes you'll see the T3 is programmed all the way through the prep. 16, 20 weeks, you're doing this at 16 out, 14 out. What are you, psychic? How do you know? So like, these are just preemptive assumptions that's completely incorrect. If you see a coach doing that on your program, bad coach.
Right. And I think sometimes, like, if you are not well-versed, but you have experience, because you could be a total idiot and you just happen to get it right every time, you cannot look at someone's prep if you're using T3 and realize, hey, I'm going to keep increasing their shit. I know they have to change. Unless they're cheating, they have to change. How significantly they change, I don't know. But all I'm saying is, again, there are people out there for sure that can handle a higher workload because they're using this thyroid medication. And then what happens post-show, again, you have these significant repercussions. So aside from the therapy sessions I need with both males and females, explaining, hey, you are going to feel this way. You might be on a dopamine rush right now. You got some food you won. At some point in the next 4 weeks, you're going to fucking wake up and be like, I'm a loser. Like, I got nothing going for me. Like, I won the show, but now what? This is all I focused on for a year of my life. I turned pro. Guess what? It doesn't mean anything. So I always tell people, if when people get so invested in like football games on Sunday, you still go to work Monday morning, right? Whether they win or lose, like, you're rooting for your team, you're still the same person. So we have this aspiration to win anything. We're competitive, but life still goes on. So that's why I always try to remind people that, there's more to life than the victories, and more so understanding that, hey, regardless of this outcome, you still need to do X, Y, and Z after. Nothing changes because you won. Doesn't mean you don't have to reverse, right? So when you throw T3, and sometimes I see people in the beginning of preps use T3. If you want to successfully get into a prep, okay, your body needs to be ready. So that usually involves a time factor. But typically with clients, I try to have lab work to ensure that, hey, TSH is where it needs to be. Free T3, free T4, all of these hormones and their thyroid are aligned with where I want them to be, rather than aimlessly starting a prep. And maybe the client is training their ass off. They are sleeping, they are following the plan, but something's wrong. And now we waste 2 months, or I'm being super aggressive with their diet, and I realize, hey, there was a problem. They should have never started prep in the first place. And now I've really wrecked their metabolism because I fucking cranked their calories down because I was scared that they weren't going to be ready in time. But the reality is they're not even going to be able to get to this stage because they shouldn't have started prep. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
100% agree.
So,
You mentioned something about people competing numerous times in a year. I want to address that because was that not a popular thing to do back in like the 90s and 80s? Didn't guys compete a lot more than they do now? Wasn't that something that was more commonly done?
They weren't as big and lean as today, so they didn't have to take as many drugs as people do today to still be at the top. You know, if you really, people like to say that, oh, they were lean back then. It was the lighting. You know, I'm being dead honest. It was the lighting. I think I posted a picture. God, it might have been like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it was like the 2002 Olympia, and like the fifth place finisher, I forget what year it was, didn't have gluten. You know, so like the standard today is so much harder that it becomes more drug warfare. So yeah, you're gonna have a harder time running the gauntlet. Back in the day, they didn't have to be peeled. They just had to be in great shape, be separated. There was not a lot of GH abuse. So yeah, they could make it further.
and again, also, like, I just want to clarify: can people do multiple shows a year? Sure. Do I think they should be aiming to make their contest prep 10 months of 12? No, because it's not going to last so long, right? Like, you're not going to last very long. Obviously, there's genetic anomalies that, hey, their food intake is pretty high. They don't need many drugs. So yeah, that person is able to compete more often because they don't need as much, right? Doesn't mean they're any better than you in terms of from a genetic standpoint. Yeah, they're better than you, right? So they have a better hand they're dealt, but it doesn't mean you can't win in the end. You just have to play the hand you're dealt in life and understand that, okay, I got to outwork this motherfucker. Like, this person's going to beat me
Now,
on the genetics, but there's
Now,
more.
from a coaching standpoint, how do you feel strategy plays a part in that? As far as being that you're a very advanced coach and you deal with a lot of high-profile influencers, there's a lot of pressure on you to make sure that things go right. And you've turned a lot of people pro. You've turned a lot of big-name people pro. Now, how do you like to go about managing that if they have to do multiple shows per year? Because I think that it's very important that you have a good coach who knows what they're doing, so they know when to push, when to pull back, how to restore your health, how to give you a little break. So how do you like to approach that if you have somebody that does have to quote unquote run the gauntlet?
So I think the one thing, whenever I work with many clients, especially the higher profile ones, like, do they require the same amount of time as someone else? But it's just about managing those expectations. So in the beginning, when someone's talking to me, generally, I don't let someone tell me what show they want to do. When I first started out coaching, I just wanted clients. I want experience, right? So I didn't know any better. Why can't you prep? I don't know. Now I realize, okay, maybe they weren't in a good spot to prep, and I should have probably read labs and all of these things. But to answer your question, Phil, I think it's about making them realize that, hey, I genuinely want your best interest. I'm not doubting that you can't do something. I'm doubting the fact that you don't realize what the repercussions are here, right? So if you really want to make improvements, this is where I tell people exactly. I'm very black and white, and a lot of people are like, hey, you don't give me compliments or anything like that. And to me, you're coming to me, we have a goal here, right? If your goal is just to look good, cool. I have a different set of expectations. If you come to me, hey, I want to turn pro, well, you're not even close to turning pro. You look like shit. Like, you're not where you need to be. This is going to take more than a cycle. This is going to take more than 6 months or a crappy off season. We really need to put some time in. So I think having that control and making that person realize, like, hey, like, Kyle actually, like, he cares, like, genuinely about it. And I'm always invested, especially in those higher profile people, because obviously, yes, there's a spotlight. If I fuck up, generally when someone goes on stage and looks like shit, rarely do they ask the competitor, hey, like, what happened? They're like, who's your coach? Who let you on stage like that? And
Yeah.
I don't need that negativity. As you've seen recently, I just had 2 competitors that were they in my typical Kyle shape? No, they weren't, right? But we also understood it's your first show. This is where we can get to. Could I have continued to prolong their prep? Yes, but at what expense? I see what it was doing to them in terms of like psychologically, they have a life move coming up. So it's just about saying, hey, like this is good enough for your first showing. You got your feet wet, you understand the process, you learned a shit ton. And for someone's first prep, I'm realistic. You don't go pro 95% of the time. Obviously, Anton, for example, our first experience together, a little different, but he did compete a year prior. Looked not so hot, but he at least did it before, right? He got his feet wet. A year later, buckled down, understood, like, okay, he trusted the process leading up. He didn't just hit me up 12 weeks out and say, hey, Kyle, I'm ready to go. We had a game plan. So, again, long winded answer to you, Phil, is when I'm first working with somebody, making them realize like, hey, I genuinely care about your success. We win together, we lose together. And if I'm more invested than that person, that's when I have a hard time wrapping my head around,
Yeah,
what
but to what you said previous, the two people you were referring to were the Trent twins, right?
yeah.
And to be really honest, for their very first show, that was pretty goddamn good. And people don't realize that. Very, 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 very rarely are you going to get somebody in their early 20s showing up on stage looking like a pro their very first time. They don't know how to diet. They don't know how to deal with the appetite and the hunger. They're not ready for it. And I always tell everybody, your first time really in contest shape, I can tell you how bad it is all I want. There's no words that are going to explain to you how you were He's laughing because he remembers me saying it. There's no
I heard it every fucking day.
there's no words that are going to explain to you how it actually feels. And the ones that are talking crap are usually the ones that are not very good at it or don't understand that, don't work with a lot of clients. Like the person that you had to make a response video to has absolutely no clients and no results in this field aside from himself. And already has a fast metabolism, likes eating clean. Very small guys. Small guys are easier to get in shape. So what's there really to say about that except what you really did say? I thought they looked great, and I thought they did very well. And like you said, they weren't like 1,000% like I want to turn pro, do this and that. But you know what? Maybe they might change their mind down the road. But I thought they looked very well. I thought they did well. I followed a lot of your content. I thought that a lot of the things that you did with them and the approach was correct. And I think that it was a great outcome, especially since they're already so very well known and, I use the word famous, there's a lot of pressure on them and there's a lot of pressure on you. But people don't understand what pressure can do cortisol wise, having to try to control that. How did you manage their minds with all of that pressure on them?
So honestly, they lived here for the last 6 weeks of prep, right?
Oh,
So
well, there you go.
I locked them in the cage. I took them to the gym. For the most part, I did cardio with them, right? So I just changed my schedule and did what I knew was needed to get them to where the last thing I would want is see them go on stage and people, regardless of what they say, they're a little jealous, right? I think even people
Of course
my
they
age,
are.
they see kids that are younger, haven't competed before, have pretty good fucking physiques for being younger and not even trying to diet. So they don't want to see them be successful because if they are, it's a knock to them. The person that I pack my meals, I don't miss a meal in 10 years, I skip Christmas. Like I always tell people, like when someone, I always ask, hey, like how old was the guy that beat you? And the reason I ask that is because I try to not make people feel better, but I try to point out like, hey, that person's 35, you're 21. If they should beat you, God, thank God they beat you because if they didn't, what the fuck is that person doing? They better hang up the spikes and go do something else, right? So I think, having them come here, I was able to just control everything because, again, I knew they weren't perfect with their diets. I can tell when their weight's going up a certain somehow, right? I give them food. Okay, you had this, we had this change when I gave you this food, and then I gave you a baseline diet. I know you have to drop after giving you a couple high days. How the hell did you go up? Oh, well, I did that. I was like, okay, all right, like come here, this is how it's going to be. And so in the final time they were here, they stayed here the final 12 days, the second time they came back here. And they lost 13 pounds in 10 days, right? And I didn't do shit with the diet. I didn't do anything different. It was just, hey, let me see your meal. Cool, go eat. Like, we're good. And I just literally controlled it in that sense. Water intake is something that people overlook, especially on like rest days. You're not as active, you're not sweating as much. And people don't realize, like, hey, if you go from having a gallon and a half of water every day and then you drink half a gallon, you might be up that next day because you're not excreting as much anymore, right? So controlling that made them realize like, oh, okay, like this is important. Like, they like most kids. Again, I use them as an example because I think they're role models for their generation, but they exemplify what their generation is about in terms of some misconceptions, right? And some things that actually work. They open my eyes and say, okay, cool, like we can use this. And a lot of the times, there's a lot of sugar-free stuff that are used. And I learned in my experience, even when I guess I was working back with Phil, I used to use like Weldon Farm syrup and stuff sometimes. And for other people, they would use like this mustard. Phil, we used to use this mustard. It's like a spicy. I think it was like Phil's mustard.
Yeah, it's sweet and spicy.
So it's got sugar in it. It's like 85 servings, so 1 gram of sugar a serving. And one of my clients, oh, I use a bottle every other day. I said, we use a bottle every other day. Like, you only have 50 carbs for the day. What the fuck do you mean? And then I realized, okay, let's yank this. Here's some good old yellow mustard, right? Or hey, I just want salt in your meal, and then you start to see change. And again, it's like innocent mistakes that they're just not aware of, right? So I think that was the main thing, having them here so I can have an eye and say, listen, like I know in the off season, we're improvement season, cool, go ahead. But right now, you're going to notice that this actually creates a little issue with your gut, right? So let's remove this variable. You're going to see a layer of water come off. And the reality is, how the hell they lose 10 pounds in 12 days, right? Or 12
So
pounds.
it seems like you gained a lot of insight into the kids of their generation based on your experience with them. With them staying with you, it seems like you figured out a lot of things that kids of their generation are doing. You're like, all right, I've got to watch out for this. I've got to watch out for that. And that comes with experience. We all learn that. I learned that in my day. I'm still learning that. You come across, different types of people, different generations, and you're like, wow, I never even thought that somebody would try to do this. So it gave you a lot of valuable insight, it seems, didn't it?
For sure. No, and I think that's what this game is about, is experience. Whenever everyone's a little different, there might be similarities, and I can say, okay, like this is very similar to how this person responds, but maybe psychologically that person, hey, this person needs a little bit of like pick me ups. Like I need to kind of be a little easier on them versus this other person, you suck. Like get better, right? And that's how they respond. So everyone's a little different. You can't coach someone the way you need to be coached. You need to coach them genuinely how they need to be coached. So my approach varies greatly depending on who I'm working with. And obviously, I have certain preferences of types of clients, but at the end of the day, my obsession is on results. So whatever is going to facilitate those results, I'm all for.
Yeah. Back to what we were saying about only being able to have so many preps in you. I want to ask you guys this. I'm not sure if we've talked about this before, Phil, but there's quite a few guys that I can think of. I don't want to say any names that, they looked like they had very promising careers when they were younger. They were big names. They looked insane. And then all of a sudden, after they turned 21, 22, they just went downhill for whatever reason. What do you think is the contributing factor from that? How can somebody go from looking like they're going to be potentially the next Mr. Olympia to just falling off completely?
So, I mean, you want me to go first, Phil? You want to go?
No, it's all you.
Cool. So I always use an example because a lot of people, again, kids nowadays always say, hey, how do I look like this? Or, hey, how is this person doing this? Like, how do they accomplish this much? And I always tell people with those younger athletes that look phenomenal, most of the time they obviously have a good genetic response, not only to gear, but to just lifting weights. They can just grow muscle a lot easier. But I always ask people, I say, you see this person came out of nowhere, exploded into the industry, looked phenomenal. As Sebastian said, hey, this is like Olympia level potential. And then all of a sudden, they fall off. I asked the client, do you think that person doesn't love it anymore? I was like, no, the reality is something happened. Usually it's medical related. Hey, you need to fucking stop. Like, because they're usually being too aggressive with what they're doing, whether that's always gear related. They're just lifting too, their bodies aren't developing yet, right? They're burning themselves out. I use the example I used to love. I had a friend growing up, very good at basketball, and he was always playing year round, right? Now it's more popular for kids to do that. But at least when I was growing up, not 30 years ago, Sebastian, but not too long ago, you had seasons. You play sport, you move on, right? You didn't just stick to one sport. But the kid was playing year round, and by the time he got to high school, he didn't really want to play anymore. And people were like, "What the fuck? Like you're so good. Like why?" And he's just, I'm tired of it. I'm burnt out. So that's also what happened. So I think when you see people coming out of nowhere, I always emphasize, like, be patient. Like, you're 21, you look better than 99.9% of 21-year-olds. You happen to see one that looks phenomenal. You don't know the backstory. You don't know if they started gear 16. You have no idea. And genuinely, you can look at someone's physique, see their face, see how they're aging, and know, hey, this person is being a bit aggressive, because gear does age you a little bit. Now, I'm not saying it's always a depiction of what they're taking, but stress on the body also ages you. Trust me, I've been in very stressful situations. Phil, you're aware of how my life is in a contest prep. Wasn't necessarily the gear. I've taken more gear in different times. It's depending on your environment. You're a byproduct of it. So if you're in a very stressful environment, that is also going to age you. And all of those things induce cortisol. Chronic inflammation will fucking kill you. Like, seriously. So that is why you see people come out of nowhere. They're either getting burnt out, not being patient, body shutting down. Fuck, like, I need to figure out something to do, right? Those are the reasons, in my opinion. But I don't know what you guys think.
No, I've got nothing to add. I think you nailed every single point, like dead on the head as far as chronic inflammation. As we know, inflammation is basically the hallmark of all disease. So, you'll see a lot of inflammation when the body's under stress. Stress, like you emphasized repeatedly, cortisol is just going to wreak havoc on your body. It's going to beat your body up real bad, and you're gonna show it. You're going to show it visually. You're going to see it in the face. Sometimes high blood pressure. You see people whose faces are like maybe look a little more purple than a normal person's would. But no, I think you're bang on. Sometimes it's the pressure. That's what I worry about sometimes, the influencer kids. I don't know if you would have insight into this. I wouldn't. But like some of the influencer kids, they've got 500,000, a million followers. You're like, damn, everybody's watching. And if I fall flat on my face, this is going to go all around. So like maybe I should take a little bit extra just to make sure that I do good. Like, I don't know how you manage that, but I can definitely see them thinking that.
Yeah. No, and I think I always tell people, like, again, I try to relate. So if someone plays sport, baseball, for example, all right, 99% of baseball players in the on deck circle, as they're coming to bat, they can have no butterflies. When they're up to bat, they're walking. You start to fuck. Okay, like, this is it, right? And then you get in the box, and it all just shuts down. You're ready to go. Right? It's always like that. And it's like good butterflies, it's not bad. But in most cases, as you mentioned, for these influencers, or even just anyone generally, right? You put a lot of pressure on yourself, and you get to show day, and I'd say a lot of peaks are thrown away, and their physique changes drastically because they're putting all this pressure on themselves. They're backstage. I always tell people, hey, like, don't look around, because honestly, and I give them X, Y, and Z examples. I literally just list things. And I say, look, the person you think that looks the greatest back here probably doesn't look that good on stage. And
Yeah.
you're just getting in your head, man. Like, trust me, there's been plenty of times where I'm backstage, there's no veins going on. Why is there no veins? Maybe you're cold. You got to acclimate a little bit. At the end of the day, all I care about is how you look on that stage. So don't be pumping for an hour and a half backstage, blasting through your resources, stressing out. All of a sudden they have to pee, right? Well, they didn't have to pee the last hour, and all of a sudden they have to pee 3 times. Those are clear signs that, hey, this person's freaking the fuck out. So I need to manage that and talk them down. Be confident. Don't rush your poses. I'm telling you, you're going to rush your poses, not because I've done it 20,000 times, but I see it happen. Like, you're naturally going to do it because you're excited. Everything's heightened, right? So again, it comes down to just managing expectations and trying to make people buy into, like, okay, like Kyle pointed out this land. I always use an example. I will point out the landmines. You will inevitably step on a few because you just want to, right? Fuck what Kyle said, I'm gonna do it. You blow up. I'm here to pick you up. At some point, I just hope I leave an impression to where you think, Kyle said this would happen if I take this step. Let me just walk around, see what happens. Shit, he was right. Cool. I just want to expedite someone's progress. Along the way, you're going to make mistakes. I think part of learning in life is from your losses. Mistakes you make. You can always look back and say, damn, I should have did this differently. Unfortunately, I haven't found out a way to go backwards in time. I'll go back to my 30s because I'm 40.
Yeah, but that was a great point that you made, though. For anybody who's watching this that's an aspiring coach, as far as building your client's confidence in yourself. Like he said, try to maybe like preemptively talk about some of the things that might happen. And then when the client sees that happening, they're like, oh, wow, well, he did know. There's a reason why you'll see people like not do so well, and then they'll go to like a Chris Aceto, and all of a sudden they do phenomenal. Now, no shot on Aceto, he's one of the best ever, but a lot of it is their belief in the process. They're like, there's no way. Chris doesn't miss peaks. There's no way. So like last prep, they were freaking out. But now, because Chris is doing the peak, they're sitting there with their feet kicked up. They're nice and calm. They're in their rest and digest state, like you said. When they start freaking out, that's when their fight or flight response goes off. They start pissing. All of that water comes out of the muscle. They start going flat. They start panicking, and all of those things. But yes, managing their mental state, but building their confidence in you as a coach plays a big part in their response and their performance. So like he's saying, if anybody who's watching that's an aspiring coach, take note of what he just said as far as building the confidence, from in the rapport, coach-client relationship, so that they understand what's going to happen. They know what to expect, manage expectations. And if you keep them calmer, I tell everybody, Sebastian, I know I've told you this, I said, I can fix almost anything. I can't fix you panicking. I cannot fix you stressing. If you stress and you have anxiety, we're going to lose. I can't fix that. I can fix almost anything else, but I can't fix that.
Yeah. I mean, knowing how your client psychologically operates is super important. I know anytime I have guys that come to me and they start freaking out, they like send me TikToks and stuff, and they, what about this? What about that? I just don't even feed into it. I'm just like, okay, like this is irrelevant. Don't feed into it, or just stay off your phone. It's because people get into their heads and then everything goes to shit. And that could even be whether it's in a prep or even in a bulking phase. Now they're like, their appetite's gone because they see this and they see that. They just overthink all these things. It's just understanding how that person psychologically works and knowing how to deal with that person.
I think also, making sure someone is, I try to have people ahead of schedule the best possible. Sometimes someone's first prep, they're never going to be ahead of schedule because the best that they're going to be is not the best that they can be in the future. It's the best at that moment in time. But when someone's ahead, they're confident, right? So if they are comparing themselves on social media, cool, I actually look pretty good, right? And maybe if there is a show, a regional, because their goal is to hit a national show and win their pro card, I try to strategically place it to where I think the person needs it. Now, do I want it to be 12 weeks apart and have them hold that type of conditioning? No, but anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks generally is what I'll do, so that the person has the confidence going into it to propel them forward rather than shift them backwards. And then I have, even with the Trend Twins, right? Usually every single client I have for show at some point starts to doubt themselves, not necessarily doubt our relationship. They doubt their ability to where they are. And, so I'll point out, maybe they're 4 weeks out, hey coach, like I feel like I look great. You do. And while you're bringing this up, I'm just letting you know in about a week or two, you're going to tell me you feel like you look like shit, you're behind, you want to quit. And I'm going to screenshot this and send it to you. And what happens? Coach, I feel like I look like fucking shit. Like I need to hop on a call with you. Like what's going on? Here you go. Right? I told you this was going to happen. So they see it and they kind of laugh and they look back and they're like, what the hell? Like, okay, cool. Because part of that final stages to get to, I always tell people, like, anyone can get to a 4-week outlook, in my opinion. You can get there. It's hard, but it's not really hard. To go from that to the great to like elite conditioning, that is where it is super fucking challenging. And yes, you have to make a lot of sacrifices. You can't have a lot of shit going on. You're not going to be the social butterfly, going to social events or whatever the hell the person might do, make a lot of content. You're going to have to shut down, have only energy. You have a spurt of energy, go get your errands done, because you're not going to have this energy later. So I just want to point that out, I guess.
It's funny that you've actually made that point, because I still have on my phone a video that I specifically made for you. It's even addressed to you. A person that I was dating at the time, because Kyle was in prep, he was doubting himself. So I filmed the video. I had the person that I was dating come right next to me, and I said, how many times did I say, I suck, I'm terrible, I'm going to quit, I'm a loser? And she looked at me, and I'm like, no, be honest, tell the truth. She's like, many times. I'm like, many. She's like, many, many times. Like, I'm going to quit. I'm going to go eat. I'm going to go eat junk. I'm tired of this. I suck. I'm garbage. And she's like, all the time. And then I looked at the camera. I'm like, Kyle, look, everybody goes through this. And everybody watching this, you're going to go through this. But again, to his point before about what he said about getting in show shape, one of my wrestling coaches actually told me this back in the day. They said from knowing nothing to being okay is here. From okay to good is here. From good to great is off the chart. So like he said, almost anyone can get to 4 weeks outlook. getting peeled for stage there's a reason why not a lot of people do it. Not because they don't know how, it's because they can't endure it.
Yeah.
I think this is also another reason why I don't want to say that nobody can coach themselves, but a lot of people think that they can. And I would say that 99.9% of people definitely cannot do it effectively. Not even just because of maybe they have all the knowledge, but it's the psychological aspect that comes into it during that final push where you start to question everything, and being able to really like accurately assess everything. Your entire perception of yourself is skewed.
I am a prime example of that. I have been pretty damn good at coaching and education and all this stuff for well over a decade. But how many times did I miss my peak or mess up at my shows or not show up the way I need? Because it's very hard to make the right call on yourself. Sometimes you think you're Superman and you can accomplish and endure what other people can't. Like I remember when I used to get close to a show, oh, I'm tougher than everybody, so I can train my ass off all the way to the show. Well, guess what? I trained legs so hard 2 weeks out that I didn't have a cut in my legs till 2 weeks post-show because everybody else was backing off, maybe because they weren't tough enough or because they were smart enough to. Me, I'm so tough I can go all the way up, and that was screwing me nonstop. Other times, I think Kyle has even seen it. I would be nervous backstage and my fight or flight would go off, and I would get back to the room, and I lost 7 pounds from the time I went to prejudging from when I got back because I was just pissing nonstop because I couldn't control my nerves. And when you have somebody else that's making those calls for you and you don't have to worry about it, you're a lot more calm. But when you put it all on yourself, it's stressful. It's very hard to do. And I'm very honest about this. All the times that I peaked myself, well, I wasn't paying attention. I was focused on helping a friend. I was focused on helping somebody else. I was not even thinking about myself. And that's why I peaked right, because I didn't or I was just really cocky for like a local show and whatnot. So I just didn't think I could lose. But every time I forgot to panic is when I peaked.
Yeah. What I like to point out, for a lot of people always ask, like, do you need a coach? And I think in most things in life, it's good to have like a mentor. Okay. In bodybuilding, especially if you're trying to be very good, I think it's good to have someone that has control and you're following, right? Does that mean they have to pay X amount of money to work with a high level coach? No, but you should have somebody else calling the shots, right? I use the example, a great athlete, LeBron. I like to use him as an example in terms of because he's probably the most prolific player that we've seen in the NBA during our time here. Sebastian, again, with reference my young age. But do we think he needs a coach, right? The answer is no, he doesn't need a coach. He knows the game, his intelligence is very high. However, when the game is on the line, he's doing what he's told and he's doing it to the best of his ability. Like he knows like the back of his hand, right? He knows where people should be. He can help them. And he doesn't have to think like, fuck, should I have called that play? Like it removes that thought, right? So when it comes to bodybuilding, especially you sprinkle in those PEDs, you cannot be subjective, right? You cannot be emotionally based. That's why sometimes when I have clients that coach their significant others, stuff like that, or their friends. I've lost a friend, a very close friend of mine that I used to coach because I was no longer his friend. I had to be his coach to get the job done, right? But again, I focused on, hey, we have a goal here. This is what I need to do. If I'm friendly and you're feeling shitty, like let me give you some food, that's not doing what's needed, right? So I always try to tell people at least when they work with me, like let me fuck up. Trust me and just follow what I say. That way when you lose, you can blame me. You point the finger, Kyle, you fucked up. Like I did everything you said. I know I did. I didn't cheat at all. And I didn't get the end result. Cool. You're right. I fucked up. But don't start asking Phil, hey, what should I do? Sebastian, what do you think? When you start doing all of that, not only does that verify that, hey, you're doubting the process, but now you're leaving room for yourself. When you're under those, I would say the stage lights don't lie. When you go to walk on that stage and whether you perform well or don't perform well, you know what you did. You know how many times you cheated. You know how many minutes of cardio you cut off. So you can lie to yourself all you want, but generally the results kind of show for themselves, right? So I think that's the main thing, having someone to give you that guidance that you can trust. And yeah, maybe do I coach the same that I did? No, I evolve all the time. So there's certain things I look back and did. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was just trying it. I didn't know. Or maybe I saw someone do it and I said, okay, let me adopt this and see if it works. And then you make mistakes, but like I said, you learn from it. And it's just building that. I've seen clients that I'll talk to, they'll ask me their opinion on stuff and I never want to step on toes. So my advice is always, hey, like I'm sure your coach has a reason for what you're doing. Don't ask me, because I don't want to get in their head, even if it's innocent, right? I don't want to make someone double think and say, fuck, Kyle said this. But post show, I say, hey, you didn't do so well, right? And like, perhaps, are you looking elsewhere? Like, what's going on? And they're like, no, I have a really good relationship. So that relationship is what holds them there. And to me, again, that goes back to what I said in the beginning, is when you have that loyalty built in, it's not so much what the results are, it's the experience and the journey. Because Sebastian, you want to get a pro card, you get a pro card next year with Phil, cool, you accomplished the goal. But now what, right? So I think people forget, they just become so goal oriented, but the process is where it's the enjoyable to be able to look back and say, fuck, like, this was the process, it's documented, it's exciting, but now what's next,
Yeah, no, those are all phenomenal points, and to some of those stories, like I've had numerous friends ask me to coach them, and I tell them no, because I value our friendship too much, and I can't make clear calls with that type of pressure and responsibility on me. Like, I don't want to screw something up for you, like to that extent, because we're too close friends. And like you said, as far as the rapport, there's actually a very, very, very top level bodybuilder that I talked sort of into going back to his old coach, which you guys probably know who I'm talking about. And I really, really dislike the coach, and don't really think very highly of him. But I thought that what they had together was awesome, because I thought that they meshed well together. They had the right plan. Everything worked out. And I said to him, it's always worked out for you before. So why would you change it? So if you have a good rapport with somebody and you have a good process with them and you trust them, trust is enormous. If you trust them, that's who you should be with. Yes, sometimes there's going to be mistakes. Mistakes happen. But the fact of the matter is, if you keep jumping coaches, that coach that you were just with has a notebook that thick on what it is that you do and how your body reacts. Every time you change coaches, you're throwing that notebook into the garbage and somebody else is starting new. So like, yeah, your coach might have made a mistake, but guess what? That new guy might make that mistake and more, because they're not even aware of that circumstance or situation now. So there is something to be said about staying with your coach and figuring things out, as long as you trust them and you trust their ability to adapt and evolve. And we're continually adapting and evolving. All three of us here right now have made mistakes in the past, have probably made mistakes this year, and we're going to make mistakes next year, because we're human beings and everybody does. We're always going to find out something that we thought was right, that made sense at the time, that is no longer right. And we have to accept that. We're human beings, and that's just the way it is. Nobody is perfect. And listen, every top coach, you think Hani Rambod never made a mistake? You think Chris Aceto never made a mistake? You're crazy. So everybody makes a mistake. Nobody is infallible. But when you continually learn, adapt, and evolve, that's important. And establishing good relationships is paramount to the entire process, I think.
Yeah. I would say those are all great points. Going back to the post-show period, before you approach, I mean, obviously you're transitioning right into a reverse, right? At what point are you pulling labs, checking biomarkers? Are there certain things you're looking for in that post-show time frame, and how soon are you looking for them?
Yeah, so generally, it depends on the client's ability to get lab work. I feel lab work is easier to obtain nowadays than it was. Again, I don't want to age myself, but it was a little more difficult. All right, my doctors just weren't willing to. You shouldn't be taking that shit, so I'm not helping you. And it's just like, okay, like, I don't want to pay this twice. So generally, at least 4 weeks, I wait for labs, usually around the 6 to 8 week mark, right? And the reason I wait to the 6 to 8 week mark, I've attempted to perhaps do some type of post cycle. If at 8 weeks, 2 months after we're done with things, right? If there are things that are still banged up, okay, that's a significant problem. And sometimes people come to me and say, hey, coach, like, look at my labs, they're not too bad. Not too bad. It's been 8 weeks and they're still fucked up. What do you think the other 44 weeks of the year, what do they look like then? Right. So as far as like certain markers for rebound purposes, looking at someone's A1C levels are important. I look at the vital organs to make sure, we don't have liver dysfunction present, how their thyroid output is. These are all things that, depending on how hard the prep was, okay, or if they were running the gauntlet of shows, these are going to be things that are impaired, and it takes time. Right. So depending on some clients, if I don't have to use T3 at all, 90% of the time I don't use it. Cool. I don't see their thyroid suffer as much. But that's not to say if someone's natural, they still have just as much trouble occasionally, depending on how severely they're dieting. So I'll try to get the lab works, usually 6 to 8 week out mark. I'll try to have an extensive panel. That way I have all the answers, right? I don't have to just look at, let's just say iron is off. Okay, cool. What's stored iron? What's the ferritin have, right? I'm looking at MMA, not just B12, right? Because all of these things start to play a role in terms of what is actually going on. As far as from there, we can presume there's adrenal dysfunction of some sort, adrenal fatigue that has now set in from perhaps abusing certain stimulants, clenbuterol. All these things are not good for our bodies. We can try to justify and say it's not so bad. But when you're banging energy drinks 2 or 3 a day, like a lot of people do nowadays, it adds up, right? To where a lot of times I always ask somebody, hey, like, how does caffeine impact you? Oh, I could drink an energy drink and go to sleep. You think that's fucking normal, right? My brother never touches caffeine. If I give him a cup of coffee, he's fucking like a rabbit, right? That's how you're supposed to respond. Not everyone's obviously like that, but you are supposed to be super sensitive. So ensuring that someone gets to that place is like always what my goal is. So hopefully that answers your lab work question in terms of what I look for.
Yeah, so you're not pulling labs prior to, like, you're not trying to pull labs immediately post-show to determine what you're going to do during that reverse?
No, generally
Yes.
not. No, I kind of know, depending on how their dieting phase was, I won't do that. Now, some people have the ability, they work with different labs, so they can get them once a month, for example, or something like that. It's helpful to see. I would expect liver enzymes to be a little elevated, even if they took 2 or 3 days off from hypertrophy training and they're well hydrated going in, right? I would expect, hey, you were taking some orals, they should be high. Otherwise, your shit might be a little fake. It's weird. But again, there's an acceptable range. So when someone says, oh, the lab work was kind of bad, what is bad, right? Are we talking, HDL is off, LDL is off? Like, what is bad, right? So that's one thing that people don't realize.
I think that it's important to be clear to everybody listening here is the fact that one of the reasons why he said he doesn't pull blood work directly after the show is because if you really prepped right and you were truly in shape, your blood work's not going to be good. There's no such thing as perfect blood work post show. You have to accept, like he said, if your liver enzymes are a little elevated, oral are probably fake. And when you start to tank estrogen so that you can start to get, leaner, drier, you're going to mess with your cholesterol profile. For females, you take something like Anavar, which is really, really bad. It's going to tank your HDL really, really bad. So the only thing you're going to do is freak somebody out by pulling the blood work directly post-show because it's not going to be good. I promise you it's not going to be good. Almost never are you going to see great blood work post-show. So there's no point in even going into that. We're just going to assume that we know cholesterol profile needs to be fixed. We're going to assume that the kidney function needs to be fixed. We're going to assume that the liver enzymes need to come down and there needs to be a break there and there needs to be some type of support. We're just going to blanket assume that there's something wrong with all of these things and we're working on fixing them, which is why we keep the doses so low on the Rebound. One, because you're so sensitive at that point because of dieting that it's like being on insulin, really. So you don't really need a lot of PEDs to grow really well on your Rebound. But we're just going to assume that a lot of things are wrong and we're going to get to work fixing them. And then, like Kyle said, after 4 or 5, 6 weeks, then we're going to check. And if things are still bad, we're like, oh, shit, let's stop this and handle it.
Yeah. And I think, obviously, a client's adherence post-show is going to impact things based on how they're eating, right? If you're creating, let's just say you go on a binger, okay? The first time I ever did a show, I was told I could just eat whatever and it would just be water, not fat. I was fucking fat quick, okay? I got fat. So the reality is when I'm starting to eat in such a manner and I'm destroying my insulin sensitivity, I'm now creating inflammation, right? Which I'm now holding more water. Blood pressure is higher. All of these things are not healthy. So they're exacerbating already perhaps poor levels depending on, again, what was being run. So I think depending on outside of prep, when you get lab work, if you're not in a significant caloric deficit, we shouldn't have bad lab work, right? Again, there's certain compounds, trend, and things like that are popularized. They shouldn't be used generally outside of a prep, right? Perhaps someone's an advanced level athlete, they're using for a quick 4-week cleanup or something like that to recomp. Okay, cool. At lower doses, like I understand. So when I see someone's program from another coach, I try to say, okay, like what was the goal here? Right. And I can generally reverse engineer and say, okay, this is what they were trying to do. Like, this makes sense. This, what the fuck is T3 doing in here in the middle of off season? Like, why are we starting prep programming T3? Like, it doesn't, I scratch my head because I'm just like, I don't even have to ask the question because there is no answer. It's just, they saw a cookie cutter type and they did it, or they had a success with one athlete. So I always tell people, I laugh and I say, look, I can give 10 people at the gym a program. It might work for Sebastian, it might work for Phil. The other 8 is not going to work for. The reality is, as I use Mike Charles, for example, Phil, I worked with Mike, you worked with Mike, Mike has worked with a couple people. Someone like that will always be in fucking shape because they are determined to make sure they're in shape. How good of shape they're in, their mood in terms of like their confidence level, how their body's feeling, those are all things that it takes, a different style of a coach to understand. And one thing I think we referenced it a long time ago, not too long ago, but probably 7, 8 years ago. I enjoy taking like a Prius, turning it into like a Ferrari rather than seeing the Ferrari and polishing it and saying, this person was already good. So I always look back and see where someone was. And it's just like, okay. And it's a reason like when I work with people going through a system that I have with Johnny, everyone sets up calls with me generally, right? I try to have a quick call with someone, could be 5, 10 minutes. And I don't ask for pictures at first. The reason I don't ask for pictures is because I'm not here to screen their genetics. And I get a lot of freaks. Trust me, I work with high profile people, so I get some freaks sometimes. But when I have a conversation and I can tell the person's not coachable, right? They have no interest in actually following a diet. I don't want to work with that person. So 10 times out of 10, I rather choose the person that has shitty genetics, but they are a workhorse. They're going to do whatever it takes than someone that I know looks fucking good, but they're not going to follow shit. They're going to make me pull my hair out. That bothers me. So that, I don't know how I got to that subject, but hopefully.
I could say
No, but
from my experience.
That's a great point, though, because a lot of times when people have had things get come to them too easily, their genetics are too good, they never develop that grit to get through the hard part. So they never had to struggle. They never had that difficulty. And again, to the topic earlier, actually, why some people drop off the map and everybody, oh my God, this guy's so good, this guy's so great, he's going to be Mr. Olympia, and then all of a sudden he's not. It's because he never hit that point where there was trouble. He was always the high school quarterback, homecoming king, best looking, most popular, never dealt with struggle. So when struggle finally hits, no idea how to handle it. Breaks down, crying, weak. Why is it like this? And never really built that grit and that tough shell to get through it. So whereas, like Kyle said, when you get those hard workers, they can usually bang through that. And like he said with Mike Charles, if I told him to sprint up the step mill for 60 minutes, he'd have done it. And he'd have done it with a smile. So people like that, that's what you really want. And again, like you said, you don't want to screen genetics. You want to screen desire, what somebody's willing to do and where their head is at. And like I still remember when I first met Kyle, he had that type of mindset. Like, I will eat gravel 5 meals a day if that's what you want, and that's what you want to hear as a coach, So whenever people apply to me, they always say, I hate when they say, oh, I know I'm not a pro. I know I'm not one of your top guys. I'm like, I don't care about that. I like to build my guys because I feel like there's more honor in that. I feel like that proves your skill more than, like you said, polishing off a Ferrari and saying I built it, which a lot of coaches do. And the industry perceives those people as the top coaches. But I want to see where the person started and how much of a difference you made. That's what I want to see.
And I think, like, sometimes, don't get me wrong, there's individuals that, they left their coach. Maybe they want to see if the grass is greener, or maybe they left for a good reason. And at some point in your career, like, maybe it makes sense to try something else so you can look back and say, okay, like, I know I don't have to ever think like, maybe if I did something else, would I have been better? So sometimes you do get those guys that are very good and they're willing to listen, and hey, they explode, they get even better. Awesome, right? But, building someone from the ground up, it takes time. A lot of people want to put in time. But going back to something you had mentioned, Sebastian, so other than the labs, right? I think, again, the takeaway for people that are listening, depending on a normal contest prep, let's say it's 16 weeks for sure. Usually I don't have anyone taking any type of PEDs or some type of performance-based cycle after the contest. And the reason is because, depending on what was used, I want someone to be healthy. I care more about longevity than where they are. So when I get someone that comes to me, hey man, like, I'll do anything to turn pro, I'll kill myself. Cool. I'll tell you where to go. I'm good. I don't like that mentality. It's fucking scary. I know, trust me, there's when I tell someone to do something, there's not anything I tell them to do that I haven't done. I've done some dumb shit. I've taken doses. I've doubled them, right? Thinking it'll be better. And I realize, hey, this is fucking stupid. Like, what am I doing? So again, I'm all about balance in terms of, like, there's a time to turn it on, bodybuilding, and there's a time to focus on your career, your family, building relationships. Again, when you prep, I always like when someone's in a relationship, I always say, hey, like your significant other's not in a relationship with you, and they're like in a prep with you, and they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, you're going to need that support system, and you're going to at some point not treat them perhaps the same way. So you have to give back. So in that reverse period, in that off season, like do those things, because when we're 16 weeks out, need that person to realize like, hey, Kyle has this like weird hold on my boyfriend. Like, what the fuck? But that's how it is. Going back to something else in terms of the reason I like to bring people off, because at some point we have to come off. We have to clean out. Post show, win or loss, especially a win or even a loss, I guess, right? Your motivation and desire to get better, if you love bodybuilding, is there. You want to get right back into the off season, into the reverse. I'm going to nail the reverse, man. I'm so excited. Like, this was the best experience. Might not be where I want, but I know what I need. Or I was that close to a pro card, I'm going to get better. So motivation and that inspiration to be better lasts. At some point, as I touched on in the first 5-10 minutes that we were on this call, I mentioned those post-show blues, the depression, all of those things, not feeling a lack of purpose. That starts to settle in anywhere from that 4 weeks post-show to 8 weeks post-show. So if I have someone on PEDs and we know they're not going to look better in terms of how hard they are and their leanness when they're in this reversed, because we're trying to get back to maintenance, put a little bit of body fat on, they're going to have to come off the 8-week point, right? So now they get to the week 4, week 5, and they're taking a rebound cycle, and they're starting to say, like, I kind of gained a little too much fat. I only have 3 weeks left. Like, fuck, like, this sucks. Like, well, I'm going to have to come off. Now, I put them in a position where they're going to have a really hard time following a plan 2 months post-show, because now they have to come off for 8 weeks, potentially based on that, where the lab work is, that 8 weeks is now 12 or 16 weeks. Now I've kind of blown their first part of their off season. So now, you know what I'm saying? So versus if I take someone completely off, I let the first 4 weeks, hey, they're fucking super motivated. They're crushing the plan. Cool. Now when things start to dip and they're like I feel like, I'm feeling the repercussions of my cycle, lower test, stuff like that. I feel kind of lousy. I'm like, hey, you got 3 weeks left. Get some lab work. We're golden. We're ready to rock. Like, we're back. And they're like, yeah, you know what? You're right. And then when they're at that bottom of that valley, a cycle, their eyes, cool. Yeah. Like, let's get to the gym. Let's fucking rock. So psychologically, that's the reason why I also do it. But my priority is just making sure someone's health is where it needs to be, because at some point in life, all of us, Phil, as you've experienced recently, hopefully not, maybe I can get back to the stage, but we realize that bodybuilding is a chapter in life. And at some point we're going to put the pen down and we're going to do something else. I don't want anyone to ever have to do that prematurely earlier than desired because of their health. I want them to do that because, you know what, it's my time. I'm ready to move on, do something else. So that's like my main obligation, I guess, I feel I owe to people, to not impact their health so negatively that they look back and say, fucking Kyle fucked me up.
Okay, so you're always pulling after the show. You're always pulling compounds out.
I'd say 9 out of 10 times I pull compounds out. The exception, based on where someone's performance is, where they're really looking to go, right? Because I get athletes that, hey, I'm fucking turning pro with it without, like, they have that mentality, right? And if I have that good relationship with them, they trust me. So I'm willing to maybe give them something post-show, but only if I know, they follow the program how they need to. They're taking the health steps to get me the lab work. And then if their prep wasn't fucking horrific and very challenging. Sorry, I'm cussing. I don't know if you have to cut that out, but
that's fine.
That's something I pay attention to, right? So if they were in prep for 32 weeks, you're coming off, man. Like, you're going to grow from food because your body is like fiending for some food and recovery. But if someone just prepped for 12 weeks and they were just in really good shape, I used to try to be in good shape myself to where I could like do a shotgun prep and I'd be ready to go if I needed. It's more easier to manage lab work, and maybe they can get away with a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
I was going to say, I think that's an intelligent approach. Me and Sebastian actually had this conversation about his career in bodybuilding. And to be perfectly honest, I don't pull punches. I have no problem saying that I think that Sebastian's going to be on the Olympia stage one day. And he's going to do very well. But one of the main things that I told him is, once we are topped out of your weight class, there's no more rebounding. Show ends, you're off. And we're going to chill for 3-4 months. then we will ease back into it, and then we will start getting ready. Once you are at the top of your class, there's no reason for us to do anything stupid post-show. Now we're trying to extend your career and extend your life on stage. And part of that is staying healthy, because as soon as your health tanks, your career is over. And people don't realize that. They think they can just take more drugs and get away with it. So, that was one thing that I made very clear to him. It's like, yeah, we're going to have some rebounds post-show, very, lighter drugs and, eating right and doing things right. But once he's topped out of his pro weight class, the top of the weight class, said there's going to be no more rebounds. The show ends, we're done. And I thought that Chris Bumstead was very smart about doing that. As far as when his shows are over, he just came completely off. He stopped. He chilled out. And I know as of recent, he kind of changed that approach. But I thought that initially that was a very smart approach.
Yeah, he usually, like Chris specifically, from my experience with him, right, for the most part, he would take some time off. And you read a lot of bodybuilders sometimes after the Olympia, they don't do shit for a while. They just stop. And the reason is because they know, hey, I'm pushing my body for an extended period of time. I know what I'm capable of doing because it's not my first rodeo. So, when I'm touching on these questions, Sebastian, I think I just want to also point out, generally for first-time competitors, again, come off, recover, right? Do those things, do it the right way, because food is going to carry you further and give you better results than any drug will. The more advanced you are, aka the more muscle you're carrying, then yeah, maybe you need a little bit of a boost. But again, at some point, managing your health is vital to success. You only get one body, right? You can't mess up and say, oopsies, let me redo this. I blew my kidney out. It doesn't work that way. So something that I just want to point out based on one's experience.
Yeah, of course. That's sort of another thing I want to touch on. What Phil just mentioned is the type of individual that you would consider, what variables there would be in place that you would say, hey, let's do a rebound phase. Let's push. Let's try to maximize this outside of just a weight cap, right? Versus let's take time off and just chill for the next 2 months. What is going to determine you making that call again outside of just maybe they're maxed out on the weight cap?
I would say, depending on my experience working with them in terms of, hey, does this person adhere to the program? Are they really about this life? Are they about bodybuilding? Do they actually care? Or are they just doing it because, they just wanted the clout that might come with their success? So I'm always focused on one's career, right? Hey, is bodybuilding going to be your thing? Cool. If not, again, why jeopardize your health potentially? Just take the food route. If someone, again, depending on their psychological behavior patterns, if I know, let's just say they go into a show and they're defeated and they put a lot of effort in, they did everything I asked, they do get the lab work, then I'm more inclined to say, let's take these next 8 weeks, let's capitalize on an already sensitive state and let's take advantage of it, because I know you're dedicated. I know you want to be better, and your genetics, we need to take advantage of every ounce that we have. So if we have this window that we can get better, and again, you are someone that adheres to the plan and you're not fucking around, cool. I'm okay with that. But again, most of the time, I think most viewers, you have to be patient. If it's your first, second show, you're in your low 20s, be patient. There's no reason. If you're going on the verge of turning pro, you just missed it, and your health's in a good standing, okay, I can understand. Maybe you can go for it for a little bit,
I've almost never seen a young kid able to follow the rebound the way that they're supposed to. You work with a lot more young kids than I have, so maybe you have experienced this, but I haven't really experienced many young kids that are able to do this. And this is something that people need to understand, like you said, as far as doing the rebound correctly. Just this past season, won a national show in another country, person turned pro, whatnot, looked phenomenal. But then, ate some things they weren't supposed to eat post-show and then had an unfavorable response. And then his thought process was, oh, well, I can just diet again and get lean, and then we can continue this rebound. And I had to explain, no, you just ruined the response. So now since you have a rebound response after your show, you will grow at an accelerated rate. You can accomplish almost in 8 weeks what you normally would in 6 months. But again, your health is still a factor. So if you can't execute it perfectly, then it just becomes like a normal off season. So you might as well come off, get healthy, and then start. So the fact that he ruined his response, I had to say, you know what? We've just got to cut this now, because the reward is not worth the cost anymore, because now your body's beat up from the show and we're not getting a rebound response. We're just getting a normal off season response. So unless, like Kyle said, if they can't be perfect on that rebound, there's no point in doing it.
So what is the window of opportunity is extremely small. So if somebody comes off, they could do their post show, and even if they binge out for like 2 or 3 days at that point, just off of
It's
a
over.
few days, it's over at that point. Just come
Over.
off, restore health, and then do a normal off
You would
season.
have
There's no
to,
more rebound.
usually in that case, I always almost go to like a very low carb based diet to get the water. Usually you're going to retain water if you're eating, because again, people think I just ate Saturday night post show, I ate Sunday, ate Monday. In theory, okay, not too bad. But the reality is, the one variable I didn't mention, you got to be in shape, first of all. If you're not in shape, right, you're not going to be super sensitive. So, yes, you probably need a boost potentially, right? But that aside, someone that's going into shape, it's not like you're starving from to the day of the show. You're literally feeding up. Generally, could be
Yeah,
Tuesday.
that's a great point.
Where the more advanced they are, the more high, the faster their metabolism, the higher their need for food. They're eating so much Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. By Saturday night, they don't want to fucking eat anything because they've been slamming food. And then again, if they do eat Saturday and they eat Sunday, now we're talking. We look back. Hey, you've consumed 4,000 calories, which is like you were just say your baseline was 1,500. You've consumed 4,000 calories for 6 days now. That's a significant problem. So no wonder you're up 15 pounds, right? That ain't going to come off necessarily very quickly unless we have a series of low days, which are going to be super difficult mentally, more than anything, to get through. So I think that's something to consider. And then I guess I always ask myself the question, what is the goal with this rebound, right? With this individual? I have Anton. You guys are aware. He turned pro. Very good athlete. Think he can definitely be a top competitor in the industry. Post show, I didn't give him a cycle because I knew he needed a rest. He's 19. What am I trying to achieve here, right? Because sure, what if I gave him something? Would he have grown even more? Yeah, but at what cost? Taking years off his life, burning him out more. So I'm very conservative, and maybe that's a fault on me. But hey, I can go to sleep at night knowing this person, I'm taking care of their health. So if they ever chose to leave, Kyle wasn't aggressive enough with me with drugs, cool. That's fine. Because if it's the other way around, that's when I'm gonna punch myself. So
I was gonna ask you. I don't know if you want to answer this, but if you take Anthony for example, like Anthony had that rebound. Was that last year, right? And he made good progress. It was after that show last year, whatever. You know what I'm talking about?
yep.
What did that approach look like?
That approach, he didn't want to follow my guidance, if I'm being honest. I,
Oh
I
wow.
gave him a plan that he wanted to just eat whatever you think he was doing, like the vertical diet or whatever the hell he was doing.
So he didn't even rebound.
No, he just pushed because again, you can generally get away with a good amount of food. Anthony is a hardworking kid. He wasn't eating a bunch of shit. He was just eating a lot of different foods introduced into a system that I think impeded digestion a little bit, but that's another side topic. So he was just pushing a bunch of clean food, fixated on, the scale, the scale, the scale. And before you know, 8 weeks post show, he was up 30 pounds, but his body fat he never got over that top weight. Let's just say, again, I think it was 230 he got to. He never hit that again in the rest of the off season. So that's a problem, right? You should always be able to get better in the off season, not hit your peak weight and then only get lower from there. So again, it's more of taking a good approach. Did he put on a good amount of muscle? Sure. Arguably, do I think he could have done it in a cleaner manner? Absolutely. Right. And he knows that. But hey, at the time, that's what worked for him. So as long as I don't see something being detrimental, I'm all for it. Like, hey, man, cool. He had gotten third that year, just missed his pro card. His other buddies had won his pro card at the show. So for him, I understand. I give him more leniency and I say, you know what? I watch, I'm here. He knows that. So he'll still send pictures. And I'm just like, hey, man, like, calm down or you look good. Like, keep doing it. How is your performance in the gym? How are you feeling in the gym? Right? Are you having trouble bending over or you can't breathe? Like, those are issues, right? So as long as the blood pressure is being taken care of, that's when, again, everyone's a little different. And then sometimes, again, life is about learning. So I always look at it like, hey, I'm not upset that he didn't follow things precisely because I know he's going to come back and want guidance. He's just trying to learn. And that's how people educate themselves. And they love the sport. So I'm not here to burn them out. And I go back to that example I used about the kid that played basketball. He was burnt out, could have been really good, but his parents, his mentors kept forcing him to play, to play, to play. Sometimes you just need a little bit of a break. So if that means detoxing from Kyle's specific plan, hey, cool, because we'll recoup in 8 weeks and fix if anything needs to be fixed, stuff like that.
Well, I mean, it
So
worked out pretty well, didn't it?
Yeah, and it worked out, and he did terrific, right? So I'm not
yeah.
upset at all.
But did he continue to push into that phase? Like, was he trying to do his own rebound, or was he off completely and that was just food where he put on all that weight?
There was some things in play for that, right? Again, we
Okay,
came
yeah,
off a disappointing finish, right? I think we should have got our pro card, but we didn't. So I knew
yeah,
psychologically, hey man, this kid's gonna be fucking. He's gonna be pretty beat, like mentally, like he's not in a good spot. So let's take advantage of this, and that's where the food thing. Again, you can eat a little bit of food post show, and you explode at first. You're like, damn, I'm 5 pounds up. I look just as lean. I'm full. That 5 pounds becomes 10 pounds. But at some point, you start to see the scale doesn't move, and you get fatter. You look softer and softer and softer, and the scale is still the same, right? And you would think, oh, I must be heavier and heavier, but you stop. You start accruing fat at a higher rate. You ruin your sensitivity. You can accrue visceral fat, stuff like that, and those are things that a diet right away we can't fix that. So he was aware of all of those things, and it was more of a learning experience and what was needed for him to be able to say, hey, Kyle, I'm ready to get back on plan. I'm ready to win my pro card next year. I've got some muscle, might have accrued a little bit of fat. These are my labs. Whatever needs to be done, like call the play, I'm ready to go.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he actually brought up a great point with blood pressure. A lot of people like to blame diuretics and drying out for shows on acute kidney damage and such. But what people don't realize is what's even worse for your kidneys is putting on 30 pounds of water in a week post-show. So a lot of people cause a lot of acute kidney damage from their blowing up post-show. And I still remember, I think I might have been 29 or 30 when I learned this lesson. My family, perfect blood pressure. No, all the way through. My grandfather was 90s with perfect blood pressure. So high blood pressure in my family just really doesn't happen very often. My dad's side a little bit. The first time I ever in my whole life had a bad blood pressure reading over like 120 over 80 was on a rebound when I ate like shit and put out a whole bunch of water because I didn't do well in the show and I was all pissed off and I was like, screw this, and I blew up. And then I still remember the first time I saw 130s, I was like, wait, that can't be right. But it was because of and this is somebody whose family doesn't run high blood pressure. So imagine people that are susceptible to it. Post show, you can cause a serious amount of damage to your kidneys in just 7 to 10 days blowing up with too much water. So you got to be very careful.
Yeah. So when you have those guys that do come off and you have to come off for 6 to 8 weeks instead of doing what would be, or that's not considered a rebound at that point. If you're just titrating food up and you have them come off everything, no longer?
So I consider the post-show phase a rebound. Whether supplements are present, I'd say 85% of my programs post-show clean out. Food is going to do what it needs to do. And what am I trying to beat? Time. So it takes you an extra year to turn pro. You know what I'm saying? So like I try to avoid those consequences, but that's still a rebound because your body's in a sensitive state. You're putting on tissue. You have the ability to put on tissue or fat at a higher percentage than usual. So that to me is the rebound phase. I'll always have someone off a minimum of 8 weeks, maximum of 12 to 16, really depends on labs. But I try to give people that break. And then I think also something in terms of like coming off gear, not necessarily post show, but at any point in time, Phil, maybe you can attest to from your experience, at some point you realize you either have to take more or you're no longer growing at the dosage you're taking. And even if the person came down, sometimes the best response is when the person comes off completely a couple months, then goes back in and all of a sudden at a very low dose, they're growing again. I have another client that's a pro that does it all the time. He literally does 4 months on and then he'll do like 3 months off, and he grows leaps and bounds of progress as opposed to when he in the past would go on 12 to 16 week blast, 8-week cruise, 12 to 16 week blast, 8-week cruise. So I think those are things to pay attention to. And the only, I guess, Phil, like, what do you think the reason is?
I think this is a great topic, and I think you guys actually might remember, I think it might have been a month ago, 2 months ago, I had a back and forth with an online group that are, pretty much self-proclaimed experts in the field and whatnot.
Down-regulation.
Exactly. You know exactly where I'm going with this. But, self-proclaimed experts, not a ton of results to speak for it, but a few fancy degrees behind it and whatnot. But tried to dispute the fact that there's some down-regulation that occurs regarding PED use. And if there is no downregulation regarding PED use, it would completely defy everything else our body does, because our body has a feedback loop relative to everything else we do that's trying to reach homeostasis. So if that was not the case, then this is the one exception with every other function in our body. So it just logically doesn't make sense that doesn't happen. But anecdotally, we see this happen. We have watched this happen. Anybody who has followed or read DC training, Dante Trudeau, who is a big influence of JP and a lot of others, he ran 6-week cycles, 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off, because when anybody who's run a cycle will tell you those first 4 to 6 weeks are when most of the gains come, because you're sensitive to it and you're very, very responsive, and then everything kind of levels off and slows down. I tend to like to run a little longer because I want to try to, quote unquote, solidify those gains. But you're always going to get your best results in the first 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 if you're lucky, of a cycle. And that's honestly what I believe is due to receptor downregulation. And like you said, coming off, clearing out, and then restarting, you are almost always going to have a better response. And I think that nearly every respected coach in this entire industry agrees with that. I don't think almost nobody disagrees with that, except the paper science-based, evidence-based, self-proclaimed coaches. But for the most part, anybody that's really good at this knows that. So,
I mean, these people that are science-based, literature-based, I have literature that shows that androgen receptor downregulation occurs, the content gets lower, and I have literature showing that strength increase is shown to be the highest within this first 6 to 8 weeks. And I sent that to all those guys, and none of them answered me. I asked them to come on the podcast.
They don't want to hear it.
So I don't know why. I don't know why nobody will address it. I want to understand why it's not being talked about. Like, I'm open to the conversation.
You know why? Because they don't want to admit a 24-year-old kid was smarter than them.
I don't know. It's
I think a lot of it comes down to, again, not everything is like a textbook, right? And even doctors, right? And anyone to become a doctor, there's a lot of literature they're reading, a lot of studying that takes place, a lot of tests they have to pass, time they put in. So no discrediting that. But even they'll tell you sometimes what they actually do in the operating room, for example. A lot of it is based on experience. It might tell you, hey, you're supposed to do this, this, and this. But the reality is, when you're performing an operation or a surgery, right, everything is not the same. There's reasons they do different orders. Sometimes it's a preference thing. Hey, I feel like when I do this, it saves 5 seconds of the surgery, right? Whatever it is. So I think it's no different when it comes to nutritional plans. You have to pay attention to what's working from a gear standpoint. Variables they consider, again, I think are age, what the person's career looked like. I think, again, I don't try to be selfish and think of like, oh, this is another billboard for me that I can show their rebound phase. I look at it like, hey, this is someone that doesn't really care to be a pro. They just want to be good, but they have a career. I noticed that their relationship was kind of on the rocker toward the end because of how hard prep was. Let me prioritize those things, because I know that person's going to thank me, right? And that's the main imprint I try to leave as a coach, is the person looks back and says, hey, that was a great decision I made to work with this person, because they genuinely care, as opposed to some people, they only care about how many wins they get, and they don't. That's what there's a lot
to be said for experience and wisdom. And anybody watching this, anybody who knows me, they know I love my analogies, right? So if you say you needed a heart surgery, are you gonna go to the person who's maybe done a couple hundred of them, or maybe even 1,000 of them, who went to a pretty good college, or the Harvard valedictorian that graduated last week? Which one are you gonna pick? There's only so much you can understand and know from, paper science. And you got to remember, our science is still very young. We're constantly disproving things that we thought we knew. Oh, we got this wrong. Oh, we thought we had this right. Oh, that was wrong. And we're going to continue to do that. And, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to discount research and science and things like that, because those people, what they do is very valuable. They're very, very intelligent, dedicated individuals. But if we're talking about receptor downregulation, how many of those studies were done on somebody running 2 grams? None. If people are talking about GH, how many of those GH studies were done on somebody running 12 to 18 IUs? It's going to be a vastly different scenario when somebody is so far beyond homeostasis, trying to accomplish a different goal, super physiological amounts of muscle and putting their body under certain stresses and whatnot. And they try to discount things all the time, like what we see, like trying to discount metabolic stress for hypertrophy. You're going to tell me that, the body is not going to have an adaptation to that? Of course it is. So just because the science doesn't prove it right now doesn't mean it won't in the future. And especially when we sit there and watch it in front of our eyes thousands and thousands of times over and over and over. And everybody who's done it, everybody who's an experienced career coach agrees, but the science people don't. Who's right and who's wrong? The people who have actually done it and watched it, or the people that are reading something that somebody else did on a piece of paper and trying to interpret it and then trying to relate it, Maybe something's missing.
Back to what you said about the approaching with, was it like 12-week cycles, 8 weeks off versus 16-week off, something like that? I would think also, like, in theory, again, we have literature showing that downregulation does occur after so long, but it also upregulation occurs as you take more. But upregulation is not going to be linear to the dose that you take. It's not like you're going to increase every 500. You're going to get the same amount of upregulation. There's going to be a ceiling for it. So if you're constantly titrating up, also depending on all the other variables, like, you're just not getting as much of a response. And obviously, when you first go on a cycle, it's the biggest jump. You're not going from 750 to 1500. You're not doubling it every single time you increase usually. So even if you did that, you wouldn't get the same response. So if you do these shorter cycles, in theory, you're getting that bigger jump. And if you're able to sustain that on those shorter times off, I would think, like how Dante did, it should give you, in theory, a better response.
Yeah, but
Dante was one of the first coaches that was jumping people over weight classes, like middleweight to heavyweight. I don't mean jumping from middleweight to light heavy. I mean jumping over light heavy and next year going heavyweight from middleweight. He was one of the only people doing that. And he did it with extremely high protein. He did it with short cycles. He did it with very low volume, very high intensity, all things that were kind of against the grain that people weren't too sure about, but he literally proved it. And then the rest of us followed suit. And, we started employing it in our own coaching, and it worked for us too. And then the people that came after us, it worked for them too. So, after a certain amount of people have shown something works, it probably works.
Yeah. But I think something to point out also, and, I think all generations are probably guilty for it, but you see it more prevalent now with like SARMs and stuff like that. I feel a lot of people have this misconception that they have to be taking something to make progress. So when you talk about coming off post show, what do you mean? I'm going to lose my gains, or I'm sacrificing the rebound phase. But the reality is, again, the food is going to do more than this testosterone is going to do. I'm not putting growth hormone back in post show the first few weeks because I don't need more water on your frame. You're already going to have that just from some food. Sarcoplasmic volume is going to increase as we're now having the nutrients to fill the muscle. So these are all things that, again, I hope people apply these things and look back and be able to. And it's hard because you're utilizing your own life and you only have so much time. That's why I always go back. Like, if you are uncertain about the coach you're working with or you want to change, go for it, right? Because you get one body. So rather than look back and it's Phil's fault, I did this for 4 years. Okay, well, you could have expressed yourself. And perhaps when people express themselves, hey, you know what? I try this. Try working with this person, or let's try a different approach. And I'm not here to say it's right or wrong, but okay, this is how you're feeling. I'm acknowledging how you're feeling. I'm pointing out what the red flags may be, but let's take this approach. So I think, again, it's adapting. There's not a one size fits all when it comes to this. There's science that proves things. And then there's always people nowadays that are trying to reinvent the wheel. But I always tell people bodybuilding is fucking boring. It's the same shit. You can try to reinvent the wheel and have a new workout every week. But the reality is, when I ask the person a simple question, hey, what do you grow the most off of? What was the best point of your career? Most people have no idea. I don't know. Maybe around that. Okay, well, what were you doing? How was your training? They have no idea, right? So the same way you would track your food, you don't just wake up, Sebastian, and decide to eat Pop-Tarts and whatever. Phil, you like to eat some junk sometimes, but hey, right? So I think people should track their workouts. And I'm not saying be a nerd and, hey, I did a dumbbell curl for 15 pounds for 15 reps. But the bread and butter movements, you should have an idea. You should stick to them. Milk them for as long as you can, and then change them out. Understand there's phases in which you should focus on getting strong, and then there's phases in which you should focus on volume, right? Sometimes PEDs, there's certain PEDs that are going to be helpful with these things, right? So these are all things to consider. It's a lot because that's the facts that matter. But the prerequisite for anything is being able to follow a nutritional plan, being passionate about it, and being intelligent. A lot of people lose that latter part because they're
being consistent, right? See, what I find, one of the things that you mentioned that I find often, especially with young kids, is they will make a certain amount of progress strength-wise, right? and then they will fall back because they either fell off or took a break or whatever, and then they'll start moving up again. They're like, oh, so like every one of their check-in forms always says, oh, my strength's going up, my strength's going up, my strength's going up. Well, it's only going up because you dropped back and then you moved back up. It still hasn't surpassed where your top strength was. And for younger people to try to build their base, you've got to get strong. You know, if you were say dumbbell pressing 100-pound dumbbells and then you drop back to 85s, and then you tell me your strength is increasing, well, until you get past 100 again, you didn't beat where you left off. Yeah. You know, so if you're constantly falling back, then you've got to fight to get back to where you just left off before you can move forward. So there's got to be a certain level of consistency, and that's going to come with maturity.
Yeah, and I also think from a training standpoint, Sebastian, like post-show, again, anything is going to kind of work generally, right? I'm not saying you should go, if you're super lean, you shouldn't be going to do squat, bench, deadlift the first week. Why? Because, again, at a young age, I always tell people under the age of like 22, 23, how many people really tear something at that age? Very rarely. They can do the 1-rep maxes and dumb shit. If I go into the gym right now and try to do a 1-rep max, I don't know what would tear, what wouldn't tear, right? I can't do it anymore. So post-show, your body's super lean, dry, not the best idea. Maybe work on more of the hypertrophy rep range, letting the food do its job. Then you can go back into that phase to get stronger. So I think that's something to consider, that many people sometimes they overlook or they try to do too much. It's not quantity, it's quality when it comes to reps, daily life in terms of your habits. It's how efficient can you be? One thing, just because I don't mean to change the subject or topic, but I forgot to mention, I don't think any of us mentioned it, but donating blood, right? I think is something that is very important. I always try to use the analogy to make people understand. It's like a car, the oil in a car. Do you have to change the oil in a car? You don't have to. At some point, you're decreasing the efficiency in the life of the engine. So your body's no different. If you're taking certain compounds, equipoise, things like that, you get lab work done, you see your H&H's fucking through the roof. That's a problem. At some point, again, you're going to have significant issues. So that's where, again, when you're younger, your lab work shouldn't look like a 30-year-old's, especially if you only took a few cycles. So why is it the 30-year-old is healthier on paper than you are? That's a problem. So I'm always about being proactive rather than reactive. So yes, I'll put additional health subs in. Maybe you can get away with not using. But guess what? If they wind up having a problem and weren't using it, that the cost of health and the cost of life to me is priceless. There's no amount of money you can ask. If you ask me if I could live one more year of my life, hey, I'm gonna do it, whatever it takes to get that year.
Yeah. I would definitely agree. I think a lot of guys don't understand what is required in this sport financially if you want to really take advantage of all these outlets, and they'll skip out on liver or kidney supplementation and these things, and just because their lab work might look okay right now, they think it's fine, and they don't want to be proactive about the long-term health benefits that they could potentially be seeing. And it's just, I think if you're going to get into sport, you need to be able to spend a lot of money and be able to invest in yourself if you want to actually have a long career or even live a long life. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth putting yourself in the position health wise to go through these preps and take drugs if you're just going to try to skimp out on everything else.
Kyle, do you have trouble with getting your clients to take all those health supplements? I'm talking about like the 25 and unders.
I used to, but now it's more popularized because the people that they look up to generally are trying to promote and take the same thing. So I think that's the good thing about social media. It's kind of given it's negative in the sense that it promotes some usage more so than in the past. But I do notice for the most part, like a lot of my clients don't have a problem taking it. They might forget or they don't think it's important. But again, that's where I'm here to try to educate them. I can't put the gun to the head unless they live here. Then I can. I've proven it. But I think I just emphasize like, hey, you don't want this to be this scenario to where a doctor comes in and says, hey, you have to stop doing this, because then what? You're going to have a significant low point. So that's what I try to avoid. And I think that's the hard thing. Like, do I expect a 25-year-old, especially when it comes to bodybuilding, like you said, sometimes people don't have so much money. So I usually ask somebody like, what is your budget? Because if you're saying you only have a certain amount of money, I'm prioritizing food, health subs, then gear. I'm not doing the opposite to where I get a lot when they look at my program. They scroll right down because there's a couple pages. They'll scroll down, or go to the tab if they're on the app, and they say, "Oh, this is it for gear." First of all, why is that the first question, right? So that tells me right away the type of person you are, and then I also am aware of moving forward where the focus is, right? So I just try to unwind that. It's not always the worst scenario, but it's just something I see often because again, people look at it like, oh man, the next 8 weeks he wants me to post cycle, like I'm not going to grow. Yes, the fuck you are. Get stronger. Like don't get weaker in prep. Don't get weaker. When you start to get weaker, now you're losing muscle. So people
You know,
ask, a lot of first timers, they ask, hey, when should I notice I'm getting, like, when should I get weaker? Don't, don't get
I
weaker.
want to, I want to, I want to add to this, because you've mentioned more than once about coming off and still improving. And people think that, oh, I'm off cycle, I can't improve. Well, one of the things that I like to focus on is I tell people that lifting is a skill. It's not an on or off button where you just either know how to do the lift or you don't. No, every time you go into the gym, you should be trying to get better at each movement you do. So even if you're on a cruise or if you're on PCT, if you're off cycle, you can improve your ability to lift. From Sebastian's following, I ended up getting some pretty young kids, 17, 18, and I told them, I'm like, listen, first of all, we're not touching gear yet. That's not even an option. But your hormones haven't even topped out yet. So right now what we need to do is get you lifting as good as we possibly can. So when that time comes, we're already ready. So during your PCT or during your cruise or whatever time off that you have, you should be trying to perfect your craft, get better at it so that when you go on, you have an even stronger response.
Yeah, yeah. I made a video not that long ago. Somebody asked me a question: why do you always lose muscle when you come off cycle? And I said that's bullshit. A lot of guys just do it because they rely on the drugs, and then they come off cycle and they stop doing all the things they were doing on cycle. They feel like they can't progress. There's a huge psychological factor behind it. Obviously, if you ran gear for 10 years and then come off for 10 years, you're not going to be able to maintain that look. But in between cycles, you should be able to hold on to tissue and still improve. And everybody tried to argue against it. They were like, that's bullshit. You're always going to lose size. But everybody has this misconception drilled into their head that you can't progress unless you're on gear once you make that switch.
No, I think I've now have anecdotal evidence with myself. I had two significant injuries, didn't lift much. A lot of people that come across me, they say, hey, you still look like you have a good amount of size. Sure. Like I've held on to tissue because I know, at least especially when I'm training, as you mentioned, I think training is the one thing you can always get better with. You can learn to contract. I can most muscles I can cramp just squeezing. Phil, I know you said that 10 years ago. I looked at you like, what are you talking about,
I
man? Like,
remember the conversation. You said to me, how long before I can lift like you? And you were expecting me to say weeks and months. And I was like, years, buddy. It's going
right.
to take years to develop that skill. And now you know exactly what I mean.
Yep. So it's just repetitive behavior over and over and over. And some people, again, genetics play a role, how quickly someone can develop results and build muscle. But for those that don't have the best genetics, you really need to perfect that skill the best you can and understand that, hey, what I use an analogy or comparison that I typically refer to, let's just say someone has poor legs. I always like legs because that was one thing, Phil, like we attacked legs. It helped me craft a different mindset in my life that I instill upon everyone. But if you don't have legs, right? Someone says, oh, I squat 500 pounds. Okay, well, do you think the answer is squatting 600 pounds or 700 because your legs suck? So obviously something you're doing is not working, right? So we need to either remove the movement, understand and look at how you're doing the movement. Maybe the tempo, the execution is poor. But often, right, power lifters, they're strong as dog shit. They're concerned with moving from A to B, right? Bodybuilding is how hard can I make this movement with the direct muscle from A to B? That's all I care about is moving properly and applying tension where I want it, directing the tension on something, right? So I think that's the main thing that people, they get caught up with numbers. Again, whether the scale is going up a certain amount, that means how much they're gaining. You're getting fat, right? If Phil told me to go eat McDonald's, I'm the type of body type, I can gain weight. No, you ask me to get to 270, I get 270. How long, when you want it? A week, 2 weeks? It's very easy for me. For other people, it's a little tougher, right? We all have our strengths and our areas of improvement, I like to call them. We just have to be aware of that and not be hyper fixated on, well, this person does this. Well, guess what? You're not that person and that person's not you. So embrace who you are and put forth the effort needed to get you to that next level, or be someone that you just has been in terms of I could have did this, but you didn't,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people compare themselves to what they see online, the influencers. This guy does this, they look like this, and they get away with this, and they try to make the justification that they could do it too, and it's just not reality. Or what you see a lot of guys do is somebody who is maybe in a position that I am, or below me, they're an amateur level competitor, but they're seeing what Chris Bumstead does, and they're going to compare. Oh, Chris Bumstead only runs this amount of gear. He only eats this much. It's like you're not and even you're not Chris Bumstead, you're not even in that position. He can't grow anymore. Like it's entirely different circumstances that are not applicable to you. So they don't take that context into consideration.
for sure. And what I always like to say to people with anything, a little goes a long way with many things, drugs, training, right? Nutrition. You don't need a ton of calories to grow. There's many instances that we can all relate to where food is lower, but we're growing, we're getting stronger. When I bring people down, generally, especially in a rebound phase, they feel awesome. They feel better than they felt when they were on cycle. Why is that? Yes, maybe the food helps. Your hormones are balancing out, your brain neurotransmitters are firing differently. But the reality is, sometimes you're taking things that are actually toxic to you and you just don't realize it, or you're eating foods that are impairing digestion. So these are all things that people kind of like don't realize, or they look back and say, well, I did this last time and it worked. Okay, well, that doesn't mean it was the right answer. It might have been luck to a degree,
A lot of times people don't realize that you look like you do, or somebody will look like they do in spite of what they do, not because of what they do, right? So if somebody was arguing with me online about something, being as good as something else, the PED and whatnot, and said, well, it made me big. And then I said, okay, so I ate McDonald's for a lot of my career and I have abs. So that means McDonald's gets everybody abs. Like it doesn't mean that, so everything is going to be, like you said, it's going to be individual. What works for one person is not going to be what works for the next. And I think this is why it's important to have a very experienced, well-versed, diverse coach, because they can identify these things in you, whereas it's going to take you 10 years to figure this out. A coach is not just somebody who's there to help you and guide you. They're going to shorten your learning curve like you wouldn't believe. If I had a coach like me, in my mid-20s, I probably would have been a hell of a lot better bodybuilder. But, a lot of that information just didn't, it wasn't that there wasn't good coaches, it's that a lot of that information didn't exist. The internet was new, so we were all just figuring things out at that point. And I always swore like I wanted to become the resource that I wish I had, because there were so many questions I had, they didn't exist. Nobody knew the answer. So all of these kids and everybody viewing this today, you guys are so lucky that you have all of this information and you have resources here like Sebastian and Kyle, that are always talking, always giving information, freely and guiding you guys in the right direction. And you guys should take advantage of it. And the ones that don't, sorry about that, the ones that don't, they don't make that type of progress. If you see somebody making quick progress, it's almost always somebody with a pretty good coach.
Yeah. 100%. So, I mean, I don't want to keep this running for too long. We have touched on a bunch of things that I feel like you could just go into rabbit holes
on. We can do it again.
Yeah. What, anything else you want to touch on as far as just the post-show period, Rebound? Anything else you think is worth mentioning?
I think we covered a lot of good stuff. I think that he made a lot of phenomenal points, a lot of points that most people wouldn't think about thinking about. I think he said a lot of things that people probably don't want to hear, but they need to hear because it's the truth and it's coming from a place of wisdom and experience. Everybody on here has experience. We're not guessing. We're not, we're pretty damn sure of a lot of the things that we're saying. We wouldn't be saying it. We've seen it work a million times. So I think that people need to really take note of this, and whether you agree or not, if you don't agree, maybe consider that you just don't understand it well enough, or maybe that you need to understand it a little bit better. But again, like I said, like a lot of the time people are saying like post-show rebound, is that the best time to grow? Yes. If you're healthy, it's the best time to grow. So Kyle's continually saying like, I don't like to keep people on post-show. A lot of people aren't going to like to hear that. But you know what? Like he said, in your early 20s, why are you in a rush? Like the better option is to be healthy and take your time. It depends on what you're trying to do, how well prep went, how healthy you are. But I think that whether you like some of the information or not, you need to listen to it.
Yeah. I think people, the main takeaway is like, just be patient, right? And the older I get, the more I try to preach this balance thing. I know a lot of people are like, it's bodybuilding or nothing. And that's cool and all. I was like that too. And the reality is you have to understand that at some point it ends. And you don't want that to be prematurely, number one. But number two, you also want to make sure you're in a position that you aren't paying the price and being upset for the remainder of your life because of decisions that you made, right? For females, I see all the time now more than ever, you have a lot of bikini girls taking boatloads of like compounds and things like that. And the reality is, hey, they just need to like train a little bit, put the effort in and intensity. And a lot of people don't realize, I think the most important thing, I guess, and I'll ask both of you your opinion, is that people often ask me, hey, like what's more important, the nutrition or the training? And to me, I think it's close, but the reality is I lean toward the training, because if you train your ass off, if you train with intent and you're doing what you're supposed to, you can get away with a little bit more when it comes to nutrition. And I have people that are nerds. They meticulous. Everything's perfect. Like the macros. Hey, I tracked my food for 4 years and they're 150 pounds. And it's like, okay, obviously it's not working, right? That's not
train hard enough.
So you're not inducing what we need to do in the gym, creating that anabolic need for anything to possibly potentially become anything. So I focus on training and I try to critique people and I say, hey, like you need to go a little harder. Now, do I think I always have a conversation anytime I talk to Nick or I see different videos, do I think you need to train balls to the wall every single workout? Probably not, right? There's a time, but for most people, they don't train hard enough to even consider that being an option. This overtraining fallacy that's out there, most of the time, it's more about managing fatigue than it is the training. So, for me, again, people don't realize when I was in my competitive years, again, I hope I still am, back, don't call me old. I was coaching and I had a full-time job. I was fucking busy, right? I was sleeping. I was in the gym more than I slept. I thought, hey, as long as I'm present, I'm going to make progress. But the reality is I wasn't really managing my fatigue. So I was just kind of working against myself a little bit. I still somehow made progress, but no one really knows how looking back. Like I could have been so much better. So when you're training properly, if you're the overtraining thing now is someone does a hard set, my CNS is fried. You don't even know what the fuck your central nervous system is capable of because you don't train hard enough. So stop. You did one set. Congratulations. Your first real set you did. Let's do it again now. Right. So I think it takes time to get better. Anytime I train with someone, I always tell people, you're not going to get the best workout of your life today. My goal is to instill habits and techniques that you can apply moving forward. And the reality is all I do is have to push you on one set. And you're going to realize that now your body's shut down. It is no longer your resources. You are completely fucked, right? And you're going to grow off this one set. The rest of it's just extra credit. And it's always like that. But eventually you can build up a workload to be able to sustain things. So when I look back, going back to what I said in the beginning of this conversation, I was training with Nick for a long period of time, about 1.5 years, 2 years. I look back at the amount of volume and the intensity we had. I don't think I could do that like for a while at this point. I would have to really try to get back to it, because it took me a long time. It wasn't just a light switch on the wall to where, all right, I'm ready to train. Like, let's crush 15 working sets, like drop sets, all this crazy shit. It was a lot more than that, right? So I think people have to realize, be patient with yourself. And again, a little goes a long way. If you are like, I guess I use an analogy, do I need to drop a nuke on a town, right? No, we just go to conquer the town, call it a day. I don't need a nuke to get the job done here. I just need, a very small, sophisticated approach, okay, to take over. So yeah. I think when you go to the maximum levels of PEDs, you're training as hard as possible. Where do you go from there? So a lot of times, a lot of pros will look back on cycles that kids are taking and they say like, hey, you're taking more than I take. And people are like, no, that's not possible. Yeah, the fuck it is. Right? Because you realize at some point looking back, damn, I take half the amount and I grow more. Why is that?
People don't want to accept that training is probably the most important thing in this equation. Because if you don't create a stimulus, it doesn't matter what you eat. There's nothing that's going on. It doesn't matter what you eat. It doesn't matter what you take if you don't create a stimulus first. And they don't want to accept the things like you said, that some of these pros take less than what a lot of the amateurs are taking. And listen, I'll tell you right now, I've coached every level of bodybuilding there is. And I will tell you, there's a lot of amateurs, and there's even local level guys that take a lot more than some of the pros. And they don't want to accept that. But ask yourself, how many of you guys train like a Hottie Chupin, or a Nick Walker, or Hunter Labrada, or Derek Lunsford? Watch these guys train. Can you honestly say you train that hard? And if the answer is no, then you need to stop worrying about the PEDs and stop worrying about everything else and worry about your training. I'll tell you straight up, when I get an application that's all about PEDs, I turn it down because I know that you're just looking for an easy way out. You're looking for a cakewalk. I want you to tell me that I'll crawl out of the gym when I'm done if I have to. That's what I want to hear. And like you said, I completely agree. Training comes first, but most people don't know how to train hard. So whenever I take a new client to the gym, the very first thing that I do is show them that they're capable of more than what they think they are. I'll ask you for a rep range on a certain exercise, and then I will force you to do more. And then I'll ask you the same question. Kyle's been through it. He's seen me do it to people. So what did that set just tell us? That you were not pushing as hard as you could have. So now you know you're capable of more. Now it's up to you to sustain it.
Was your question regarding progression happening or health?
As far as what?
You said training or nutrition. What do you think is more important?
Oh, training. Well, training is what's going to create the stimulus. If you don't,
what did Kyle ask?
Oh, so when people ask me that, they're generally they're referencing, hey, how do I make better progress? How do I look like so and so quicker? Right?
Oh,
yeah, that would definitely.
But a lot of
definitely
people
attribute it to training.
Diet related, because a lot of people think they train. Oh, I train the best.
No, you mentioned before. You said think back to the time when you grew the most, and I could exactly remember that exact time, and it was when I lived in Denver, and it was because I wasn't even running a lot of gear at the time. I mean, I'd say I knew I was running 750 tests and 300 deca, which some people think that's a lot. I've run much more than that. Was just a normal standard cycle. What?
That's pretty basic.
Yeah, it's basic. It's nothing for me, at least. I don't know, but I was eating a lot, but I was training so fucking hard at that point in that time, and I had this guy Waddy with me that trained me, and he would push me every day. And you're gonna do the 150s today. There's no way I'm doing the 150s. I would do the 150s like every day, just get in my head and make me do insane amounts of volume and do stuff that, I would never even program that way, but I blew. That was the biggest I ever was. It was the strongest I ever was, and it's just. I think training and pushing yourself to that point is really the driving factor. Like you said, you don't necessarily have to put yourself to that point all the time, but you need to know how to push yourself to really that point in the first place and have it as a tool. And if you don't know that point, you're never going to get close to it either way.
If you pick up a weight and have a rep range in mind, and you're positive you can hit that rep range, you're not trying. Simple as that. If you're not, I wrote something very long. I think it was like 2013, where I said, if people always say, I love training legs. No, you love the results of training legs. Don't lie, because if you love training legs, then you don't train legs. Nobody likes feeling nauseous, like they're going to throw up and pass out, and like they're dizzy and they can't see and they're laying on the floor, convulsing. Nobody likes to feel that way. They like the results from it. If you enjoy leg day, then you don't train legs. If you're not getting anxiety on the way to the gym for leg day, then you're not training legs. I'm sorry.
Kyle, let me ask you. I've asked nearly every person that's come on the podcast this. I've already asked you, Phil. I already know your answer. And people think this is a controversial take. Do you think that you know how to train legs hard if you've never thrown up during a leg workout at some point in your career?
So just to rephrase this, if someone were to claim that they train legs hard but never threw up,
they've never thrown up during a leg workout, but they claim they know how to train legs super hard,
I would find that very hard to believe. Because again, the amount, again, it gets into the subject of what's training hard. Is it a number of sets? Is it a duration of time? Throwing up, I guess, right? You can have the one side. Again, I always play the devil's advocate. If I have someone run through a superset, if any of us run through a superset right now, I'm going to throw up because I'm fucking tired, man. Like, I'm going to throw up. But from a pure set, that's what I guess I would rephrase the question. If someone has never thrown up from a hard set, they didn't train, because you get to the point where you're going to pass out, right? Or you're going to throw the fuck up. That's how it works. That's when it's over. It's not when people think, oh, I have one more. You're thinking, what do you mean? Like, just
Mm-hmm.
There's no thought process that if you're thinking that, you're A, defeated yourself, or B, you definitely have more in you, because there's no thought. When the muscle is not firing anymore, it won't move. It's game over, right? So that's why again, it goes, we trained legs so many times, Phil, but I like to answer that question, okay, without rambling. No, I think you need to experience what it's like to be pushed to your maximum threshold in a productive manner, not from running like a squirrel and doing a bunch of things that I would throw up from if I did right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the best answer he possibly could have given. Because I could probably do jumping jacks till I throw up. Is that going to do anything? So like he said, you have to do it in a conducive manner, but you have to understand what it feels like to push yourself to the brink in order to be able to say that you truly train hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sets thresholds too. You surpass, maybe it's a mental barrier, a physical barrier, right? There's no surprise. I think I was talking to Johnny about it, Phil. There was one time he was leg pressing and he went to rack it and you stepped on his hand.
Yes, I did.
Magically finished the set, right? And it's just like, hey, so I always think of that and tell people, and I get very aggressive, I guess you could say, in person. And that's what I've learned really propels the people that are really trying to build a lot of muscle, because they set these limiters and they're lowering it because they just doubt themselves, right? So why do I use the Smith machine for squats sometimes, especially if you're training by yourself? Because you can train to failure without worrying about getting hurt. At the end of the day, you're safe. And subconsciously, regardless of what anyone wants to preach, if you're doing a barbell bench press, subconsciously, you're worried that I can't move this weight, versus if I'm on a Smith machine or somewhere where I have safeties in place, I can literally push to the brink of failure and know I can't get hurt, which is a crucial element to training as hard as possible. Right?
We've had some pretty good experiences with this. I remember one leg workout. Me and Kyle decided we were going to go into the gym and see who could squat 315 more. Now, I want you to keep this in mind, because this is a very important point. I was a stronger squatter than him at this point, but in his head, there was no way he was going to lose. So I think I ended up hitting 27 reps, and then he got under the bar after. And you could see that 18, 19, I'm like, oh, I got this. And then his head, he's just like, no, fuck you. Like, no way. And what did you get, 30?
You're talking about the 315?
Yeah.
I think it was 20. I think I beat you by 1 or something like that.
You beat me by 1 or 2 reps, but he was shot at 18, and the rest of it just came from pure heart because he just refused to lose. And mind you, I was the stronger squatter at the time. I should have been able to do more. But he went second, and in his head, he's like, I'm going to die if I can get this. Yeah. And it just shows you can push yourself if you really want it.
No,
it's adrenaline.
For sure. I think a lot of things where I think probably in another podcast, right? If I have the gracious, luxury of coming on, you grant my old ass privilege. But I think that's something to touch on, is the importance of training partners and how they can be beneficial, how they can be detrimental, things I see in the gym, right? I go to a very popular gym. So I see, what's going on in the gyms. I've been around those great gyms in the country, I guess you could say. So I see what's different nowadays versus what was prevalent maybe back in the day when there was no phones and stuff like that. And obviously it plays a difference for sure. But I think we live in a world now where we have a lot of things at our fingertips. We can literally search and Google a lot of information, but if you look in the wrong places or you're around the wrong people in life, then again, you're not going to get the results you want. So I think, again, be mindful of content you're consuming, I guess the reflection of the people that are speaking it, what do they have to show for it, anecdotal evidence they're speaking to. Don't just be I think it's good to read textbooks and be able to reference them, but make sure they apply. And when you can combine both, then you're very powerful, you're knowledgeable. But at the end of the day, you can't get away from that equity, for sweat equity. You have to put in the work. Very rarely do I see someone craft a physique and they didn't try. And God, if they do, I can only imagine what they would have been had they actually, trained properly, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll save the trading stuff for another episode and dive into that.
We'll do this again, because this was a gold nugget of a segment here that I think a lot of young people this is really going to help accelerate their goals in their fitness. So thank you, Kyle. Thank you for coming on and sharing all of this information with us, and your own perspective, your own unique experiences, and a lot of things that I wouldn't have thought of, that a lot of the listeners probably wouldn't have thought of. It's very valuable.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. is there anything you got going on that you want to plug real quick, either of you?
Phil?
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
No, I got nothing. I got to hop on a flight to go to Anaheim, and that is
I'm easy to find online.
so.
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for listening, guys. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you're subscribed, and we'll see you on the next episode of Brass Tack Bodybuilding. Peace out.